Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Thursday. We have another fun and loaded show ready for you. We are back after taking the day off yesterday. Brian's got his voice back. We are ready to rock and roll. And we moved the midweek rundown to Thursday, no longer the midweek. So today we have just the Notre Dame rundown. We're covering a lot of different topics today, guys. We are talking about star power on the defensive side of the ball. That's going to be in show one today. Part two of today's show, we're talking about the biggest spring questions for the offensive side of the ball. We'll be talking about defense next week because, Brian, believe it or not, spring ball starts next Friday, which is just crazy to think. I mean, this time has absolutely flown by, and I'm very excited to be up on campus to watch the boys out at practice. That's for sure. And then in part three of today's show, we're talking about Chicago recruiting. That's been a constant topic that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks here in the offseason. Chicago is a recruiting ground that Notre Dame absolutely has to have success in over the next couple cycles. We're going to break down some of the top prospects in each of the 27 and 28 class. And then we're going to wrap everything up today with the next show. We're broadening our view, and we're talking about the next programs from each conference that we believe have the best shot at making their first playoff appearance. Now, we're talking about the 12-team playoff. And the 12-team playoff is kind of a different era than what the 4-team playoff was. So going to have a lot of fun conversations around that today as well, Brian. Fun show today, man. Really fun show.
Yes, I'm excited about it, Trev. It's going to be a blast. The Chicago recruiting one is going to be very interesting, and I hope the summer goes by as fast as as it has so far. It's like December, January took friggin' forever. It felt like. But once we got through the portal, it's kind of like the last month and a half, 2 months has just flown by. And I hope that, that's the same thing is true of May, June, and July anyway. But probably for anyone who's a teacher, it's probably like, dude, you shut your mouth right now. Sorry about that, y'all. But no, I'm ready to rock and roll, Trev. We got some fun topics to talk about today. And it begins with kind of building on what we talked about last Wednesday. We talked about the star power on offense. We're going to talk about star power on defense today. We're going to talk about our biggest questions for the offense going into the spring, which you said I'm excited about. But I'm also very interested. We're going to talk a little college football today, as you mentioned, Trev, and get into the top five, the teams that we think have the best shot to make their first playoff berth this year. And it's going to be a lot of fun, man. But let's kick things off, Trev. Star power. We talked about it last week. Offense, star power. They need it. They have potential to have it. We're going to talk about the same thing on defense, right? Like, hey, look, there's star power on defense. Who is it? Who can be it? But I think the interesting conversation to have at the beginning, Trevor, is to pose the question, is there one side of the ball where more star power is needed to be an elite unit? And I think that's a very interesting topic of conversation and there's a reason we're having it before the defensive show than the offensive show.
No, that's for sure, man. Sometimes I think it kind of comes down to a personal philosophy and how you believe and how you would like to see games play out, whether you're a fan, a coach, or a player. And to your point, is it more important to have star power on defense than offense? I think there's strong arguments on both sides. In one bucket, would you rather be able to score points on anybody and have the ability and have multiple players on one side of the ball, call it offense, that that you can put points on the board in any scenario against any defense? Or other bucket of conversation, would you rather have a defense knowing that you can stop any level of offense with the level of star power that you have? I think that's a fascinating question, and one that I'm interested to hear your rationale for it, because as of right now, and I could easily be persuaded to one side or the other, as of right now, I don't really have a side of the ball that I would pound my fist on the table and say, no, it should be this side.
I definitely think it's defense. I think the point you made, Trevor, is good. Like, yes, if you have elite players on offense, you can do some amazing things, a.k.a. LSU 2019, sure. Clemson 2018. My point is you can be a championship caliber offense without elite players. You can have a lot of good players. You can have great scheme, great coaching. There's things I can do as an offensive coach to, with movement, with pre-snap alignments, with tempo. There's a lot of things that I can do to dictate it to where if we're just good across the board, we're going to still have a pretty good offense. Is it easier to have an elite offense with elite talent and star power? Absolutely. But my thing is, I think you can turn good players into stars on offense with elite coaching. When it comes to defense, I don't think you can turn good players into elite players on defense nearly as easily, if you can even do it at all. And that's where it comes down to for me. And this is something that, one of the few things that Brian Kelly ever said that I agreed with, and Brian Kelly doesn't say very much at all that I agree with, never has. But he talked about, like, you need dudes on defense. It's much more about the Jimmies and Joes on defense at the foundation of it. And the point is, if you give me 11 good football players, I can have a pretty good top 25 offense. If you just give me 11 good football players on defense, I'm really going to struggle against the better offenses in the country. Where I can hold my own defensively if I have just good players across the board, because at the end of the day, defense requires a lot more of, hey, are you just good enough to play there? Now, is coaching very important on defense? Absolutely, as we found out last year. You've got to put those players in position to make plays. But if I've got an average athlete at linebacker, I don't care how smart he is, he's going to struggle. Perfect example, you can give me as many Joe Schmitz as you want. Smart kid, great attitude, hard worker. I'm talking post-injury Joe Schmidt, 2015 Joe Schmidt. But at the end of the day, he's not going to be able to chase down a outside zone against a top offense, because he can't run the way you need him to run. Offensively, I think I can do some things against the top defense if I've got good players. I can hold my own better in that regard. There's things I can do offensively to control the clock and those type of things. I think defensively, you have to have top players to have an elite defense. And I think that's why you've seen Notre Dame recently. Now, I'll say this last part. Elite players on defense can also help overcome major deficiencies on from a coaching standpoint. And no, that's not a shot at Chris Ash. That's more a shot at Brian Van Gorder, because his scheme was such that if you don't have Jalen Smith and Kavari Russell and Romeo Okwara and Sheldon Day and Isaac Rochelle and Cole Luke and guys like that on the 2015 team, they're giving up over 30 points a game. I mean, it was that bad schematically. You can somewhat overcome some deficiencies. I'm not saying they did that last year, because they didn't overcome coaching deficiencies the first 2 games, and they weren't overcoming coaching deficiencies the last 8 games. They made coaching changes. But I say, look at what happens when you actually have big-time talent and you get good coaching. You have an elite defense. So I think that's something that it helps on both sides of the ball. I think it's required on defense to have that kind of talent. So the question is, does the Notre Dame defense have it? Well, we know they have it with one guy, Trev, and we'll talk about whether they have it beyond that.
Yeah, Notre Dame, unlike on the offensive side of the ball, and you could argue CJ Carr on the offensive side of the ball. I think that's fair. But defensively, they have one certified star coming back, and that's Leonard Moore. He was a unanimous All-American as a true sophomore. He was deemed the number 1 returning cornerback in college football last year. And he was still productive and a better all-around football player as a sophomore than he was as a true freshman, leading to him being named a unanimous All-American and a finalist for the Jim Thorpe Award. First finalist Notre Dame had since Todd Light. And so there's a lot of things that back up Leonard Moore being the number 1 cornerback in the country. And I think that's fair. Now it's just a question of how much of a star will he become, not will he become a star. And that's what I'm so excited to watch this season with Leonard Moore.
You triggered me a little bit, Trev. I had to bite my tongue and let you finish. You triggered me. It's a freaking joke that Notre Dame hasn't had a Thorpe finalist since freaking Todd Light.
100%.
Julian Love wasn't one, really. Benjamin Morrison wasn't one. Xavier Watts wasn't one. Like, it's a freaking joke. But anyway, actually, no, you said first corner, but Julian Love should have been there because Xavier Watts was. But Julian Love should have flipping been in there. There's been plenty of corners that should have been in that conversation. But again, it shows the Joe Moore, the Jim Thorpe Award is ridiculous. But with Leonard Moore, Trev, it's simple. Just keep doing what you're doing. Yes, there's areas that he can get better. There's areas that he can clean this up. And there's like a slightly higher level he can get to. We talked about this last week. I think consistency. It's a little bit more consistent. He was a sophomore last year and he made sophomore mistakes at times. But it's like the nitpickiest of the nitpicking, to do that. The big thing with him is just don't take a step back. Stay healthy, keep doing what you're doing. You do that, you've got a cornerback you can build an elite room around. And what we're going to do here, Trev, it's going to be a little bit different. Is last week we just kind of went back and forth on guys that we thought could be stars. We kind of decided to break this into like different categories. And Trev already mentioned the already there group. But the intriguing thing and the thing that's going to tell the difference on how good Notre Dame is going to be defensively, like, look, there's no excuse to not have a top 10 defense this year. None. If you don't have a top 10 defense this year, you got the wrong people leading your defense, okay? Top 10. To be that elite top 3 defense, you need some guys that have the tools to kind of step in. So who are the guys that step into that level with Leonard Moore next year? I think those guys that are I think there's, in my opinion, Trev, they've got 3 to 4 guys that are right there on the cusp of stepping into that. And I think they need at least 2 of them to do that. And I think you start up front with Boubacar Traore.
100%. One of the things that we've seen from championship caliber defenses before is you have stars on multiple levels of your defense. It's one thing to just have the best corner in the country. What are you looking at linebacker? What are you looking at defensive line? And to your point of being on the cusp, Boubacar's there. Now, we had a conversation about him last offseason, and now that he's healthy again, there was a lot of expectation around, hey, is this going to be a 12-sack year for Boubacar? Is he going to be an All-American? It's like maybe because he has that potential, but he's also a year removed from a significant knee injury. So that expectation might have been a little lofty for him in 2025. 26, it's a different conversation. You've now had a healthy season. You went through the spring healthy. You went through the summer and fall camp healthy. You didn't get injured throughout the year. Now it's time for Boubacar to take that next level and be that dominant edge rusher, a presence that Notre Dame has lacked since Isaiah Foskey has left. Not to the fault of anybody. This isn't a shot at recruiting efforts. This isn't a shot at Al Washington. Some of it's just been unfortunate circumstances. If Boubacar didn't get injured in 2024, I think we would have been talking about him in 2025 like how we're talking about him going into 26. But there's been some flashes in the pan. Javonte Jean-Baptiste worked out a lot better in 23 than I thought that he was going to. I thought he was going to be a good rotational player. He ended up being an impactful guy. But as far as a star on defense, Boubacar has an opportunity to step up into that limelight.
When you look at Boubacar, Trev, I think what he was last year is kind of what we expected him to be. Talented, productive. I mean, he was over 10 tackles for loss, led the team in sacks with 6.5, had over 30 pressures, and only played 11 games. I mean, if you look at the pressures he had, 31 pressures in 11 games, and you give him as many, let him play as much as we saw them play the year before, he's at 45 pressures. That's a pretty good number. It's not elite, but it's a pretty good number. But the question is, can he take it to that? Is this just who he is, which is a really good football player, or is there an elite level for him to get to where he can take over games? Because I think Boubacar had flashes where he'd take over moments, but there was never a game where I felt like for 60 minutes against a decent team, they're just going to have to figure something out with Boubacar. And to me, that's that greatness. That's what an elite player is. You have to game plan around him. Bad teams had to do that, but the good teams would do that in situations, but he never forced them into it, which again, Trev, we weren't necessarily expecting him to do that for an entire season. We talked about this last year with Boubacar. We talked about this with Bryce. Yes, we expected a breakout year from Boubacar, but the one we got is kind of what we expected. Not like oh my gosh, he's going to be an All-American. Because the point we made was, if I remember correctly, we used the Isaiah Foskey example where he didn't play one year, then he was a really good rotation player the next year, and then it was his third year that he really had that breakout. Well, with Boubacar, because of the injury, I think I think that set him back a little bit to where last year would have been his monster breakout season if he doesn't miss the last 11 games of the previous season, because he was starting to become that guy. And then basically last year he was what he would have been the final 11 games of the 2024 season. And then 25 could have been his breakout. But now I think you see that. And, you know, I've been watching some defensive film lately, Trev, and there's just like little things with Boubacar that you say, okay, can Charlie Partridge get this stuff out of him? He needs more counter moves. You know, there's times when he looks a little bit uncertain of, okay, what should I do now? The guy got my initial move. What should I do now? I think those things you kind of get to. Being even more consistent against the run. There were times last year he was very good against the run, and times he was just kind of okay. Being more dominant on a snap-to-snap basis is something that Boubacar is capable of being. He's shown flashes of being. Now that he's kind of got that, as you said, that full year away from the injury, that full year to rebuild his endurance, rebuild his conditioning, get his game back on track, get those reps back. Really good redshirt sophomore season. Now it's time for Boubacar to become that game changer on the edge, which I think he's capable of being.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to watch him do that. But the benefit is Boubacar's not the only person, the only player that's on the cusp of becoming a breakout player on Notre Dame's defense. That's a strong benefit. And I don't think I'm muted. So, like I was saying, Boubacar's not the only player on Notre Dame's defense that's on the cusp, which is a promising sign. Like I said, you're going to need stars at every single level. We've already talked about Leonard Moore. We've talked about Boubacar Traore on the defensive line. Now let's move back and talk about the linebacking room, which is going to be huge. And it's somebody that we've talked about here consistently on the show, and that's Drake Bowen. Drake Bowen is somebody that was a captain as a junior. He returns this year and will likely be a captain again. I would be extremely shocked, especially because it's a player-voted honor to be a captain at Notre Dame. So he is that next guy that has the opportunity to step up into stardom. And I would argue that out of all of the players that we're talking about here that are on the cusp, he might have the strongest foundation. There's another player that we're going to talk about at the end of the on the cusp that he might have the best foundation, but Drake Bowen was a starter as a true sophomore, and he really took over as one of the leaders of that defense in 2024. And then obviously we know what he did in 2025.
Trev, if you'll allow me to kind of audible a little bit, I want to talk about Drake and Adon together.
Okay.
Right here. And the reason I want to do that is because what I'm going to say about Drake is also exactly what I'm going to say about Adon. And here's what it is. There is no question who the two leaders are on defense coming back next year. Like veteran leaders. And I think you could argue there's three that we know of. We already talked about Leonard Moore. There's no question that Drake Bowen and Adon Schuler are going to have C's on their chest again this year. No doubt. There's no doubt they're both going to be very good football players for Notre Dame. There's no doubt. They've already been that for now 2 years. Here's the question with Drake and Adon. Are they just they are what they are, which is really good football players, veteran leaders, not going to get you beat, going to make plays, but maybe just not elite, not necessarily like star impact players? That's the question for both of them. They're both really good football players right now. And when we talk about star power, we're not talking about reputation, draft play. We're talking about guys that take over games, guys that change the game, guys that you have to game plan everything that you do kind of around those guys. And if you don't, they're going to make you pay for it. Well, the reason you want more star players is because you can't game plan for Boubacar and Leonard Moore and Drake Bowen and this guy and that guy and that guy. Eventually, you're going to have to say, hey, we're going to have to try to block that guy one-on-one or cover that guy, And that's the thing with Drake is I have no doubt as long as all these guys are healthy that Drake Bowen's going to continue to be a really good football player for Notre Dame because he's already been a 2-year really good football player. Adon Schuler's already a really good football player. 2-year really good impact player. And you look at the plays that he's made. I thought Adon last year had a bit of an adjustment to now you're the guy. And I think he put a lot of pressure on himself early to be that guy, and I thought it caused some inconsistency. I think Drake had some inconsistency early because he's trying to adapt to a new defense, and they're asking him to do different things, and the D-line wasn't necessarily playing like great, considering what they were asking them to do. I thought as he got going, he was very good. As Adon got going, he was very good. Drake made more overall improvements to his game than Adon did, but they were both very good football players. And at the very least, I think what we saw from them the last 8-9 games of the season last year is exactly what we're going to get from this year. That's the minimum. What we're going to find out, and what I think the spring starts to show us, is there another level that Drake and Adon can take their game to. And I'm not talking about like, okay, more consistent from a doing your job. So they both make, 5 less assignment mistakes or mental mistakes, and their technique is even more sound. I'm talking about taking their impact production, their impact performance to another level. Part of that is cleaning things up. For Adon, that means being a cleaner tackler. That's going to be a big thing for Adon, is he's going to have to, continue to do a better job as a tackler. And I thought he was better this year than he was the year before. For Drake, it's like, look, dude, you're there a lot. Now you've just got to take your game to that next level and be an even more effective player. But I think those are things that when I look at them, I say, these guys have all the talent in the world. They've got to make more plays. I mean, I think Adon they're both tied for first in missed tackles, according to Pro Football Focus. Drake made more than he did the year before. Adon made fewer, but they still both made too many mistakes, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons why that was the case. I think if you look at Drake, a lot of his kind of happened early in the year. He had 4 against Miami. We've talked about why that was the case. I think when you look at Adon, he had 5 in the first 2 games. I think there was 33% of Drake Bowen's missed tackles last year came in game 1. Over it's actually 5 out of 12. So almost half of Adon's missed tackles came in the first 2 games. So like some of that was the adaptation to the new defense. Clean that up, but then also, more importantly, make more plays. Drake, you're getting close to those tackles for loss. You have a lot of stuffs right at the line of scrimmage. I want to start seeing some of those happen 1 yard, 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Don, you're really close to making even more plays in the pass game, locking your side of the field down. Those are things that I want to see from them. And if they can do that, then they can become stars. At the very least, they're both going to be really good football players. They're on the cusp of that. We just have to find out if they have kind of hit their ceilings or not with their game. And I'm not saying they have or haven't. I'm saying that's the question that keeps us from that. I don't question that with Boubacar. There's no doubt his game can get a whole lot better. I need to see that Drake and Adon can, because the difference between where they are now and them becoming stars is not that great. It's just clean up this, and you're good. It's not like, well, hopefully Drake can shave a 1/10 of a second off of his 40 this offseason. It's not that. You know what I mean? It's okay. How will those two guys be now that they're in year 2 of the Chris Ash defense? Now that they've mastered certain things, now they have a better understanding of what he's asking compared to what Al Golden was asking. I think that's a big part of it for me. So I think those two guys kind of go together, because the questions about them becoming stars is different than maybe what Boubacar is, or the next guy we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. And then the last guy that we're talking about in the on the cusp category is somebody that burst onto the scene last year. And I think at Notre Dame, we just have to start getting accustomed to, and this is the task of Aaron Henry to continue going, is either a freshman or a redshirt freshman kind of just bursting onto the scene in the secondary. And obviously we're talking about safety Tay Johnson. He is somebody that saw minimal snaps against Miami, played a bunch against Texas A&M, and then earned his first collegiate start because Adon Schuler's ruled out for a targeting penalty against Texas A&M. And then from then on, Tay Johnson held on to his spot in the starting lineup, and he remained. And he ended up being second on the team in total interceptions. He showed off his abilities as a tackler, his instincts as a football player, dropping back into coverage. Year 2 for Tay Johnson could be that, Xavier Watts going from 2022 to 2023. Now, this isn't me staking my claim saying that, the Fort Wayne native is going to go out and win the Bronco Nagurski Award, or he's going to be a finalist for the Jim Thorpe Award. Those aren't the expectations that I'm putting on him, but he could have that level of a breakout to where you saw the potential with Xavier in 2022, and he really took advantage of it in 2023. Tay Johnson could be a star on this year's defense. That's for sure.
What's crazy about it, Trevor, is as good as he was last season, he's not even close to reaching his full potential. Not even close. And that's a scary thing to think about. Part of it for me is obviously you've got your kind of year one starter mistakes that he made last year, stuff that he's going to have to clean up. It's a pretty sound tackler, for what they asked him to do. You don't see him. He doesn't miss tackles as much. He played under control, but there's a lot of times I just felt like he was not where he needed to be from a position standpoint, or maybe a split second late reacting to certain things. They're, not always taking good angles of the football, because sometimes you can miss a tackle because you're not where you're supposed to be. It doesn't count as a missed tackle, but you should have been there to make that play, or you should have squeezed on that route. There was one time, and I don't think it was the Arkansas game. It was another game where Drake Bowen has a ball thrown over his head, and everybody's like, "Oh, Drake Bowen." I'm like, no, 9 should have been there. Like, Drake takes the underneath, 9's supposed to take the over top. There were things like that where with Tay, you're like, dude, he was unbelievable last year. Like, he was so good last year. But you're like, man, there's such another level he can take his game to now that he's got that year under his belt. That's kind of a scary thought, Trevor. Now, was he a star last year? No. Would we be having a different conversation about him had he not missed the last couple games of the season? Maybe. Maybe he's the one getting the pick 6 against Syracuse on the, who knows? But what I know is now that he's got that year under his belt, with the work we've been told that Tate puts into improving his game, he's got a chance to be a star. Here's my only concern about Tay Johnson, and this is really it. Can he stay healthy for an entire season? That's it. He was banged up in high school. He got hurt last year. It was nice to see him last summer at Irish Invasion. He's filled out a lot. So, I think he's got the armor on his body. He's just got to stay healthy. And you just hope that he's not one of those guys that just is kind of always going to get a little dinged up. If Tay can stay healthy and just continue to make normal year 1 to year 2 strides as a player, I think he's going to be a star this year. I do. Because I think it's one of those things where, it's funny, cosine tangent said, I almost consider him a star now, almost. Exactly. That's what this category is, on the cusp. They're not there yet, but they're close. With Tay, it's just about doing the little things as well as he does the big things. The big plays he makes are just outstanding. He's got a feel for it. Part of that goes back to the fact that he played some quarterback in high school. I mean, you can tell he's got, he's a thinker. And then you add on top of that the football talent and the athleticism, and you're like, now you know why this kid's got a chance to be a star. I fully expect Tay to go into year 2 as a starter and jump into that category. I think he's going to be the next great Notre Dame safety. The question for me is, how do defenses look at these two? I have a feeling we're going to see a Don Schuler have a monster season that somewhat overshadows Tay from a press publicity standpoint, because coaches are going to pop on film and say, if I got to pick my poison, I'm going at 8, not 9. And then Don's going to make him pay for it. And that's kind of how I see it. But I just think Tay is that guy that I have a feeling teams are going to be game planning. We're going to try to avoid 9 as much as we can. Whereas 8's just like, dude, this guy's a problem too, but you can't avoid 3 guys in the secondary. You know what I mean? You got to throw at somebody, Trev. You just can't be like, all right, well, we're just going to throw at DJ McKinney because we can, you know what I mean? You got to throw at somebody. And so I think you're going to see teams try to get the linebackers into coverage and do different things there. But at the end of the day, Trev, it really comes down to this for me is this duo is going to be elite. There's no question. It's arguably the top safety duo coming back. As a duo, I think they're already a star duo. But again, there's another level for that. I still say if we'd have seen middle of the year a Don Schuler and Tay Johnson in the opener, maybe things are a little bit different.
Sure.
on some of those plays. Because even though Adon was a returning starter, it was a new defense for him, different coverage structure for him. And that's why we saw some of the mistakes. Like 2024, Don Schuler does not allow that ball to get caught in the end zone late in the first half. Doesn't happen.
I mean, shoot, if we would have just seen Tate Johnson in more of a capacity in the first game, that might have gone differently. Who knows? It's kind of that fun what-if game we could play. Just if we saw him play starter-level snaps against Miami down in Hard Rock.
Didn't get the double digits.
Yeah. So maybe. But what I do know is you're going to need all four of these guys to step up. Obviously, they have their established star in Leonard Moore, but like we've talked about a lot on the show, Notre Dame is the favorite still to win the national championship by our friends over at FanDuel. And you need more than just one guy. And these four players that we just talked about will help get them closer to their ultimate goal, but not at the sacrifice of some of the other guys that we're getting ready to talk about. Obviously, we've talked about some players on the cusp. There's just a litter of players where the potential is there, but there's three that kind of stick out above the rest. And like we just did, we're going to kind of work front to back. We're going to start again along the defensive line. And when we're talking about potential, do you have much more star power potential than 6'7", 270-pound Hall of Fame genes than Bryce Young? Like that's where you got to start with this conversation.
Trev, it's one of those things where you could make a case that Bryce Young could be on the cusp category from the standpoint of his talent. I mean, his talent is such that you could argue there's not a big jump from, he's already kind of got that ability, but his game still needs a lot of work. And that's what we're going to find out if he's capable of making that jump. Look, he was a very disruptive player last year. 29 pressures, was number 2 on the team. He had 11 hits plus sacks in the quarterback. But when you look at a guy like him with his ability and you're like, how did he only have 2 sacks? And it's like, because he just couldn't finish, because he's still a young developing player. He's still a raw, it's not as raw, but was still a raw player that was really developing his game. There's a ways between where Bryce Young was in 2025 and where he can get to be a star player. There's a lot of room there. There's a lot more room than, let's say, for Drake and Tay and Adon, whose game, not talent, game is already on the cusp of this. The reason you have to put Bryce Young in this conversation, though, Trev, is because the talent is there. I mean, the talent is easy to see. Like, dude, when it goes on for this kid, it's going to be lights out, which is exactly what the conversation was about Isaiah Foskey in 2020 going into 2021. Like, look, you saw the flashes last year. You saw the tools. You saw the potential of him last year. The question now is, can he become that game changer? I think that's more of the question that we have. I mean, look, Isaiah Foskey in 2020, that was his second year at Notre Dame. Redshirt freshman season, right? We've talked a lot about this. His second year at Notre Dame, he had 153 pass rush snaps, according to Pro Football Focus. And in those 153 pass rush snaps, he had 18 pressures and he had 10 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So that was a pretty good season. And you could see the flashes. Last year, Bryce Young had played 202 pass rush snaps and had 29 pressures and 11 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. If you give Isaiah from his second year and you project his total number of pressures to the number of snaps that Bryce Young had, he's still 5 short of where Bryce Young was. Now, where he would be ahead of Bryce is he'd have more sacks and hits plus sacks on the quarterback. He got there. Bryce was a more disruptive player on a snap-by-snap basis, but Bryce is, like I said before, he's kind of still learning the game. He's kind of still trying to understand. Like, it's a thinking man's game in a lot of ways, playing defensive end. I'm doing this to set him up for that, or he does this, and I've got to have an immediate, counter. But you could see the flashes from Isaiah that year, and the same thing is true for Bryce, Trev. Is you can see the flashes. The talent is there. The potential's there. The question is, can he put it all together? And that's what remains to be seen. And that includes especially more dominance in the run game. That's an area where Bryce was Like pass rush wise, I have no issues that Bryce is going to be a disruptive pass rush guy this year. No doubt. He's been that already in 2 years at Notre Dame. I expect a 6'7", 270+ pound defensive end to also be a monster against the run, and that's where Bryce has to get his game. That's where he needs the most work, and that's more than anything. That and finishing in the pass game are the things that are going to determine, hey, can he take that jump? And now you go into year 3, and we saw Isaiah Foskey, in his second year. We talked about this, and first year as a rotation guy, Isaiah Foskey had 18 pressures. He had 10 hits plus sacks in the quarterback, 12 stops. Good season. Goes into year 3 at Notre Dame. Finally a starter. Light goes on. He ends up having over 30 pressures, 15 hits plus sacks in the quarterback, and has double-digit sacks that year. And then basically repeated that season the next year. 33 pressures, 15 hits plus sacks in the quarterback. Again, double-digit sacks for Isaiah Foskey. Bryce Young is capable of having that type of year 3 jump. We've seen it from a very similar body type, a very similar skill set. And I would argue that Isaiah Foskey doesn't have the natural God-given gifts, even that what Bryce Young has. So the talent is there for Bryce. It's can he take that jump? And it's a much bigger jump for him than it is for Boubacar and some of those other guys.
Let's take it back a level to the linebacking core, Brian, and let's talk about a guy that has generated a lot of buzz and really has generated a lot of buzz since Notre Dame got on campus. And that's linebacker Kingston Viliamu-Asa, who's currently working his way back from an injury that he sustained tail end of the regular season this past year. He is another player that has all the potential in the world to be a star and might have the best God-given ability in the linebacking room. 6'3", 230, 240 guy that can rush the passer, drop back into coverage, make plays as an off-ball linebacker.
Super instinctive. Yeah.
Very instinctive, very talented, very rangy. He's another player that has all the potential in the world to become a star.
This is a short conversation, Trevor. Everything you just said, I agree with wholeheartedly. Gifted, and he's been productive. It's where's he at health-wise? The only thing, if Kingston hadn't had the injury he had last year, and then we don't know what his status is going to be this offseason, he's in the second category. He's on the cusp. He's like, he wasn't quite there yet, but now he's year 3, he's going to make that jump. No question. It's not even a debate with him. It's just, where's his health? Is he full speed? Is he full go? Is he going to kind of need that year to kind of get it? He injured his knee like 2 months later than Boubacar injured his. So like that's the thing is like, I don't know where he's going to be. You have to be careful because you remember Mitchell Evans had a knee injury late in 2023, and he was never quite the same for like the first month or 2 of the season in 2024. Just wasn't the same guy. Does Kingston have a similar kind of like it takes him a while to get back into the groove? That's the only thing that could possibly keep him from becoming a star linebacker is that right there. Whether it happens this year remains to be seen. If I had to guess, I think with Kingston, we'll see him get back at some point in time, eventually get back into the full-time rotation role, and he'll kind of look like what he did last year, which is really good. And maybe it's 2027 that he becomes a star. But that's all related to the knee injury and the time he'll miss on rehab. If he hadn't injured his knee, he's like, we're talking about him the same way we're talking about Tay Johnson and Boubacar. It's expected that he's going to jump and become a star this year. The knee injury is the only thing that's giving me pause.
Let's talk about Christian Gray at cornerback. And this is, for lack of better terms, his last go-around, his last dance at Notre Dame. And he's a player that you want to talk about flashing. I mean, I don't even know if flashing does him the best because we talk about 95% of the time Christian Gray's that lockdown corner that we know that he can be. Unfortunately for him, his mistakes are glaring, and that's what drags a lot of people's opinions of him down. But Christian Gray is 95% of the way there, but that 5% kind of unlocks his potential to be that star on Notre Dame's defense wherever he lines up this year.
I feel like when we talk about like a Don's like real solid, like 90 to 95% of the time. And when he misses, it's like a missed tackle here. It's a little late to close on the football here. He makes the tackle, but he gives up a 12-yard completion, that kind of thing. With Christian, it's like dominate, give up a 60-yard pass. Dominate, and completely whiff on a guy at midfield. Dominate, just blow a coverage. Like it's that kind of stuff with Christian. And he's kind of that like lightning rod on defense for fans, because as a corner, when 90-something% of Notre Dame fans watch games on TV, they don't see it live, Trev. They're not watching the All-22. They only see how's Christian Gray behind that guy by 5 yards. How did Christian Gray get smoked by Jacoby Lane like that? I think most people can forgive the game against Jeremiah Smith, but it's that combined with what he did the first 3.5 quarters against USC that you're like, dude, this is a problem. You know what I mean? And it's just like, look, you've got to figure out a way to trust yourself, to trust your technique, to trust everybody around you, to like just what you do on the first 9 snaps, do on snap 10. You know, like if a guy gets past you, just use your speed, use your ability to recover. Don't start grabbing, and that tells me you don't have confidence in yourself. That's really what it comes down to. Does Christian have the confidence in himself and what he's being taught to be a consistent football player? The other thing with Christian is like Benjamin Morrison, Xavier Watts, Don Schuler, guys like that, they showed up. Leonard Moore, they knew exactly what to do when it came to preparation. Like they were taught, they were quick learners. They were Christian's thing. And then this is not necessarily an insult at all. Christian's an awesome kid. He's much more of a happy-go-lucky, like fun-loving. We talked about this last year. Just a great kid that likes to have fun, very strong in his faith. I think Christian is still learning how to prepare like a player with his talent level, how to focus like a player with his talent level. That's really it. It's preparation and focus with him. If he can answer those 2 questions, he's going to be an outstanding football player, whether he's playing field corner or nickel. Like he has a chance to be a star player. And you talk to people around the program, and it's like fans are like, why does he get so many chances? Because the Notre Dame coaches see what he does 90% of the time, and it's like nobody else can do that other than 15. Like that's what they see. They see a guy that can cover better than anybody else on their roster other than 15. I remember having a conversation with a Notre Dame coach this summer, and he was just kind of, this offseason, this winter, and he was just kind of frustrated with the perception of Christian Gray. He's like, people don't realize, like, man, this is a high round draft pick. This is a day 2 draft pick right now. That's the feedback he gets that they get from the NFL. He said, if the light can go on, he's gonna get picked very high. And if Christian would have jumped in the portal, he would have been a hot commodity. We've been told that too. So I think the town is there for him. It's just, is he willing to put in the work, and can he stay focused snap after snap after snap? Because a cornerback, you lose focus for one play, it's Jacoby Lane running by you for a 60-yard gain. Right? For a D tackle, you make a mistake, you don't get off a block, you got Drake Bowen right there to protect you. That's not always the case at corner. If you make a mistake and somebody gets past you, the only thing there's nothing in between him and the end zone. And that's what Christian Gray's got to clean up. If he can, he's going to be an outstanding. Is it going to be star level? Maybe, maybe not, but it's going to be close. It's going to be close. He's got a chance to be elite. He's got to figure it out, put it all together.
Absolutely. I have a feeling that we'll end up talking about him very similar to how we talked about Cam Hart after the 2023 season. A lot of attention went to Ben Morrison. He was the star in the defense. I understand that completely. But the way that we talked about Cam Hart in 2023, absolute star on the field. I think that's what's ahead of Christian Gray as well. I'm with you.
Trev, that's a great analogy, because Cam Hart in 2022, we were saying a lot of the same things about. Now, the difference with Cam in 2022 was Cam was going into his second year playing corner, basically at all. 21 was really his first full year playing corner, and and he was kind of coming along, and he was real flashy in 2022, but he was also a guy that, had some moments where got missed. He had the shoulder injury. And we were like, look, dude, if he can be consistent, put it together, because I think it was, I forget what, I think it was 22, but we were talking about like before that shoulder injury, it was starting to get there for him. I think with Christian, I think Christian's injury early last year threw him into a major funk that I don't know he ever necessarily kind of recovered from. And that's going to be a big thing for him, is he's got to stay healthy. He's another guy that just you hope he can stay healthy, because the tools are there, Trev. There's no doubt about it. He's got all the talent in the world. He's has to put it all together. And look, and we saw it, right? I mean, he had his struggles at times last year. He had his struggles against USC. Rest of the year, Christian was outstanding. After the Pitt game, the last 3 games of the year, Christian gave up 1 completion on 8 targets. And I think the 1 completion he gave up, I'll be honest with you, that Pro Football Focus counted as him. I don't know that I agree that was on him. Like, he was very good in that regard. It's just the lack of consistency. And like, here's the bigger part. In the last 5 games, if you also include the NC State game, he gave up 1 catch on 6 targets. So in 4 of his last 5 games, he gave up 2 catches on 14 targets for only 44 yards. But right in the middle of that is the USC game where he had some struggles. Now, he also had a big pick in the USC game. But then he gives up 2 plays where it's just blown coverages. That's the thing with Christian, is when he's good, he's really, really good. But then the USC game happens. And you're like, that's the thing for him, is can he put it all together? That's going to be the question. But the good Christian Gray is very, very, very good.
Absolutely. Last couple players that we're going to mention here, Brian, are newcomers to Notre Dame's defense. Every other player we've talked about, hey, we've seen him in this capacity. They did this year. Can they build upon it? You're going into year 3. But for Francis Brew, the transfer defensive tackle from Pitt, this is his first year putting on the blue and gold, but he has the ability to make his way into that conversation, and I wouldn't put it past him to do it.
Yeah, I think with Francis Brew, he's the newcomer of, like, okay, is there a newcomer that you look at and say, if I could pick one guy, that newcomer that becomes that star, who would it be? It's a no-brainer that it's Francis Brew. And like, I think Tion Gray's going to be a good player, DJ McKinney, Jaden Sanders. There's guys to look at. But Francis Brew was the most productive where he was. The film was very impressive. And here's the other thing is, with all due respect to the talent at Pitt, and Pitt had some good talent. I mean, we've raved about their linebackers for 2 years, Trev. Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles and the Loveland kid. I mean, they had some, but the rest of their defense was not to the level of what. There was no Boubacar. With all respect to Jimmy Scott, he's not Boubacar Traore. He's not. I don't even know that he's Bryce Young. Like, there is no Tion Gray or Jason Onye or even an Armel Mukum talent-wise next to him at D-tackle, with all due respect to the other guys that were there. Now it's like, okay, he is like, it's going to be a lot harder to key on him. Does he take that jump? And again, Francis Brew was a true sophomore last year. Like, he wasn't red. He was a true sophomore last year. I think you go into year 3 in a system that should allow him to still be effective and productive in attack with better talent around him. I think Francis Brew has a chance to become a star player as well.
Absolutely. Definitely keeping my eye on him. And then the last player that I'm keeping my eye on is the Colorado transfer, DJ McKinney. We talk a lot about you're going to have to throw at somebody. Let's play out the scenario that he gets to start at field corner and they kick Christian Gray inside the nickel. Mm-hmm. Well, do you target a guy that's in Leonard Moore, that's the best player in the country at cornerback? Do you target arguably the best safety duo in the country? Do you target a 3-year starter in Christian Gray that you're a pass away from getting it picked off no matter what the moment is? Or do you target the guy that had his best season starting alongside the Heisman Trophy winner in Travis Hunter? DJ McKinney's going to have his opportunities, so he very quickly could work his way up the ranks of now star,
like a Kobe Bryant type of season where he gets tons of, he's a difference maker, an impact player. He's not Sauce Gardner, but he takes full advantage of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I have my eye out on for DJ McKinney. But all encompassing, Brian, and I know it does the same for you. This conversation gets me really, really excited about what this defense can be. And it's not for the players that we talked about. It's for the players that we didn't talk about. Like, we're talking about star power on this defense. Mind you, we didn't mention Jason Onye, who's coming back for a 6th year. We didn't mention Tion Gray. We didn't mention Jaden Osbury. We didn't mention Jalen Sneed. We didn't mention Madden Faramo. We didn't mention Luke Talich. We didn't mention Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Kari Adams, Joey O'Brien. That's what we're talking about here, folks. The margin for error
Keon
all
Keeley.
Season long. Exactly. Yeah. Keon Keeley, who's
Rodney
another newcomer.
Armo
It's
Mukum.
insane.
Right.
Absolutely insane. That's what gets you excited about this defense. These are just the players in the conversation to being the stars of the defense. There's 4 or 5 guys on the defensive line alone that could be what Boubacar was last year. That's what gets you excited about this, man. It really does.
I agree.
It really does.
Depth of talent is a big thing.
100%. 100%. Well, folks, that's going to do it for part 1 of today's show. Don't go anywhere. We have a lot more content coming your way. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, and with spring practice starting next week, the best way to stay in tune with everything Notre Dame football is be a premium message board subscriber at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 2 of today's show here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're going to be talking about the Notre Dame offense and kind of their outlook going into spring. Now, there's been a lot of hype around this unit, and rightfully so. Mike Denbrock is going into his 3rd year. You have a very highly talented recruit or a wide receiver room. Your running back room is still loaded with talent. And you have your first returning starting quarterback under center since 2020 when Ian Book came back. Oh, and by the way, CJ Carr is also a preseason Heisman favorite by outlets like ESPN. I know Bill Connolly talked about him being the best number 1 quarterback coming back in college football. He's also the preseason Heisman favorite by our friends over at FanDuel. So lots of reason to be excited about this group, but there are also some questions, and that's what we're going to address in part 2.
And by the way, they just scored more points in a season than any team since like 1912. They just set a modern record since World War II ended in yards per play, and it wasn't close. I mean, they were over 7-3, their previous record, which was set by the 2015 team that had Will Fuller, CJ Prosise, Josh Adams, Mike McGlinchey, Quentin Nelson, Ronnie Stanley, Alize Mack, Chris Brown, Amir Carlisle. You know, and it was like by 0.3. Like, that's a big difference. So, yeah, lots of reasons to be excited, but there's also, I think, more questions on this side of the ball. Like, when we do our biggest questions on the spring on defense next week, it's not going to be a lot of significant questions outside of one, Chris Ash. What does he do? With offense, I do think there's a lot of questions because I think with the offense, a lot of the conversation, Trevor, outside, even including CJ Carr, but I don't view CJ this way. I think some can, and I won't necessarily tell them that they're wrong. Or push back too hard, but I think there's room for people to say, listen, I've got questions about CJ still. Okay, fine. He wasn't the guy. Okay, whatever. That's fine. I get it. Fair. I don't agree, but it's fair. But outside of that, almost everything about this offense is an if or a potential outside of the coaching. That's the one known. What do we know? Mike Denbrock builds elite offenses. Who was the offensive coordinator for the offense, you know, whose record they broke? Mike Denbrock. You know, like who, by the way, a couple years ago had one of the best seasons of if not for what they did in 2019, we're looking at the,
The 2023 season is being their best offense in program history. Agreed completely.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So we know that, but everything else, honestly, outside of CJ, to me is I think it's going to be really good, but.
Yep.
And that's why we're kind of having this show.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some of these questions that we have on offense. And It starts with the big boys up front. We've spent a lot of time already this week talking about Notre Dame needing to be a line-driven program. We previewed and gave an overview to the offensive line on Tuesday. And they're also our biggest question mark as this team heads into spring. I mean, for the offensive line, simply, what's the lineup going to be? We have an idea. We've connected the dots. We've talked to sources. We watched a video, but we don't know what that lineup is going to be. And the spring is going to be the time where you initiate that conversation and you start to see if Will Black's going to work out at left tackle. You see if Anthony Knapp, when you kick him inside, is going to pick up to it, like what his projection fits. And so that's where you have to start with the offensive line up front, man.
Look, we talked about it yesterday. We'll work pretty quickly past this one, Trev, because a lot of this we dove into on Tuesday. Who is going to start where? Like, that's question numero uno. Is Will Black, in fact, going to get that shot at left tackle? If he falters, what do? Do they kick Anthony Knapp back out to left tackle? Do they move Jagasol there? Does Matty Augustine get a chance to compete there? Does Styles Prescott get a chance to compete there? Does Grayson McHugh get a chance to compete there? Or are they just going to kick Anthony Knapp back out? What's the health status of Ashton Craig? What's the health status of Charles Jagasol? Like, there's still a lot of questions here that the spring is going to answer, because that's what this is. This is a spring question. So what we're not going to talk about is, can they improve the red zone offense? Can they make, can they do better on third down, or can they do this schematically? Those are not things we're worried about right now. Those are things we'll talk about when we get into the fall. These are more bigger picture questions. And I hope that these questions get answered so that we can then go address, okay, how do you fix the red zone offense? How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you start faster? Those get answered once you get these questions answered, and it really starts up front. The offensive line, there's no excuse for this not to be a big-time offensive line this year. But there is work to be done. There are players that have to come back from injury. There's questions about who plays where. All those things have to get figured out this spring. We won't rehash it too much, Trev, because we talked about it on Tuesday. But how well this one gets answered is, to me, going to determine anything else you want to talk about the offense. Will be largely determined by how well this one gets answered. Joe Rudolph has an opportunity over the next, we're in March, so I'd say the next 12 months, 10 months, to go from being a guy that's, I would argue, the biggest question mark amongst the offensive staff, if not the entire staff, outside of Chris Ash, to a guy that people are lauding as an elite coach. Like, because that's how fans are going to react if his line plays the way it's capable of. It's a big year for him. Can he get that out of the unit and change the perception about him as a coach? It's got the great opportunity for him, and he's got the tools. He's got to push the right buttons, Trev. That's going to be a big thing. That's, without a doubt, question number one.
Definitely numero uno on that list, and it has to be. And Notre Dame set a yards per play record and a points per game record with just average to good offensive line play in 2025. What can they be if they're top level, they're top three? I'm excited to see what that's going to look like. But one thing that they won't have this year is running backs Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, which kind of brings us to the second question that we have with this offense. How does Notre Dame replace those two? And when I look at this question, I love the way that you formatted it, because it's not just who's going to rush for 1,372 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns in the regular season next year, and who's going to have 2 100-yard kick returns for touchdowns in big moments. I don't think that's the question. How do you replace the impact that they had? Their ability to, okay, when you needed a play, who'd you get the ball to? I know he didn't get fed the ball a lot against Miami, but there was an attempt to get 24-4 going even when the game was still in doubt. There was an attempt of a focus to get Jeremiah Love the football against Texas A&M in crucial moments. Who did they ride in that game-tying touchdown drive? Jeremiah Love against Texas A&M. How do you replace that impact, not necessarily just the overall numbers, which is still a task, but replacing them is a question that they're going to have to answer.
Yeah, and this is, like we said, this isn't so much about a who, it's about a how, to your point, Trev. It's last year you knew in big moments you were going to get the ball to one of the running backs, and they were most likely going to run the football. Now it's like, okay, but who's your okay, games on the line or early in the game, we've got to, we're struggling, we got to figure something out. And you think of perfect example, the Orange Bowl 2024. In 25, it's 24 season. Offense is struggling in the first half. Struggling. What'd they do in the second half to get him going? Now, we all remember the big play by Aeneas Williams, but remember, it was Jeremiah who they rode to start that drive. And he came out like a man possessed. Are you going to have that same mindset this year with the running backs you have? I'm not saying no, because who finished off that drive? It was Aeneas, you know what I mean? But the point is, are you going to go into a big game like they did Texas A&M and say, boy, we need to get something going here offensively. We got to figure out how to get forward the ball more. Who replaces that? Well, part of it's running backs. Part of it's receivers. Part of it's other things. But the other aspect of it too, Trevor, is schematically, what do you do different now that you don't have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price? Your entire outlook of your offense is going to be different. Even if the scheme is the same, even if the playbook's exactly the same, how you build this unit is going to be different than how you built it last year. You can't just plug in Aeneas and Keidron and Nolan and Javion and Jonas and say, okay, we're just going to do exactly the same stuff we did this year. We need you guys to be as good as Jeremiah and Jadarian. That's a silly ask. But the running backs can still be impactful. But the offense has to be built differently. You know, and then the other thing too is, do you just run the same scheme? I don't know that you do, because I don't know that mid-zone is where you're going to make your living with Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams the same way you did with Jadarian and Jeremiah. They're different runners. So that's another part of the question that you look at it, Trev, is and this kind of goes into, number 5, so I won't go too much into it, but there's just a lot of questions about how do you replace Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price? Not just at running back, their impact on the offense. That's what's more at stake here. We know who the players are going to be, but how do you replace them? Who's your go-to guy? Who's your get me the ball in this big moment? I want the rock guy. In 2024, you had several. One of them was Jeremiah, and at times Jadarian, but Jeremiah was that guy. But you had Riley Leonard. You also had him. You had Jaden Greathouse at times. You had Jordan Faison at times. But the one constant every single game that you knew we could count on this guy was 4-13. Last year was 24-4, 4-24. Like, you knew you could count on them when you needed him. I would argue that 0 was that way too, because I felt Malachi was at his best in the biggest moments. He was really good in big moments. But they're all gone. So it's beyond just who do you replace at running back. They're going to replace them with talented players. But it's the impact, how the offense was everything about the offense was geared towards them. That's going to have to change. And what does that look like? Spring's going to tell us.
One of the things that's going to help us answer number 2, not us answer, but find out the answer to number 2, is really our third question. Is this the year that the wide receivers finally step up in the way that we believe that they can in a big way?
Yep.
That would take a lot of weight off of this running back room to have to be like, okay, Aeneas, Keidron, Nolan, and potentially the true freshman, it's time for you guys to go and be 4-24. This room stepping up is going to be absolutely huge.
Yeah, Trev, there's the what's the old expression, right? Nothing is certain except for what? Death and taxes.
Yeah.
Well, in our world, it's like nothing is certain except death, taxes, and Irish Breakdown talking about the potential of the wide receiver room. Like from start of the season to end of the season. It's always been that. Well, if this guy can do this, if that guy can do this, if Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey are what they hope that they are, if the freshman class can do this, if Cam Williams can do that, if Jaden Greathouse can do this, if Malachi Fields, there's always those ifs. They've never really been able to put it together and go through a season where you felt like you got everything out of that room you could have got out of that room. It was the closest we've seen since 2018 was probably last year. Part of that's the quarterback. Part of that's Malachi. I thought Jordan Faison played really good football. But then there's that big question mark in the slot, about not using Jaden Greathouse early. Then he gets hurt, and there's just all these different things. And it's always been like they were good, but. Yeah, they did some nice things, but. And then other years, it's like, dude, this was a liability. This room was a problem. You wonder, like, what would Sam Hartman's year at Notre Dame look like if he was thrown to Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse, and junior version of Jaden Greathouse, junior version of Jordan Faison. You often wonder what that would have looked like, but that's not the reality. So, question is this the year it happens? And there's nothing else that needs to be said, Trev. We've talked about how good these guys are. There's no questioning the talent. And I don't think anybody in the chat questions the talent. The only debate we could probably have in the chat is, well, I think it's Greathouse. Well, I think it's Faison. Well, I think it's Mylan Graham. Well, I think it's Quincy Porter. I think it's Micah Gilbert. I think it's Elijah Burris. I think it's this, light finally goes on for Cam Wins. I think it might be Caden Finley, but I'm a big Bubba Frazier guy. That's the debate. Which of these talented players do you think is going to step up and perform? That's what we're all debating. Nobody's debating the talent, but what we can all probably agree on, if we're being honest with ourselves, is I need to see it. I need to see it. And I would argue that Mike Brown's in a very similar position to what Coach Rudolph is, where I think Mike Brown gets a lot of heat. Some of it's understandable. Some of it I don't think is justified. I don't know how you can watch how the receivers played last year in a lot of instances and be like, they're not coached well. And find out if they're coached at an elite level, but we've seen growth from them on how they play the game. Yeah, wow, you just plugged in a transfer last year. Well, yeah, who coached that guy 4 of his 5 years of college? It's Mike Brown. You know what I mean? Like, he developed Will Pauling. And so he's got a lot to prove too, but I think he's another guy who could change his perception amongst the fan base with a good year. I'm expecting it to happen, but I'm doing so with a skepticism that goes way beyond Mike Brown or any individual players. It's just, we've been here before. And we've got to find out if this is the group that does it. And are they doing it because of them, or are they doing it in large part because of how good CJ Carr is? And I'm like, well, I don't care as long as they do what they need to do. Like, I don't care if CJ puts a ball like in a spot where no other quarterback can put it. Oh, okay, fine. Catch it. Make the play. You know what I mean? Like, do what you got to do. Somebody in the chat, Craig WD, said Mike Brown walked into a mess when he came here. I agree, and that's why I think he gets a little bit too much flack for what he walked into. And I think he did a good job last year. The question is, can he do an elite job? That is the deal there. I think the only major question I have about Mike Brown, I know why he made the mistake he did last year with Jaden Greathouse. I get it. He had a much longer relationship with Will Pauling than he did Jaden Greathouse. I mean, that's just the facts of the matter. But the guy's still done some really good things in Notre Dame. The question is, can he take him to the next level? Same question we have for Joe Rudolph. It's the same exact conversation we had with the offensive line. Talent's there. There's no question about that. Can you put the right guys in the right spots? Can you build continuity in the room? And can you coach the guys up in a way that you feel like you're getting the most out of the majority of your players? That's the question. And none of us know the answer.
No. If we knew the answer to the question, man, I'd feel much more comfortable about this wide receiver room going into the season. But I'm with you. It's cautious optimism from somebody who's very much a show me guy. And this receiver room is very much show me, but the margin for error in the room gives me a lot of confidence. Our fourth question is a little bit interesting because it's about the tight ends and what role will they play in this year's offense from a program that has been deemed as tight end U. It's interesting for this to be one of the 5 to 6 questions that we have about this offense going into the season, but there's been a trend as of lately that you could argue the tight ends haven't been as impactful as they were in the height of their days with Tyler Eifert and other players in that, and those likes Kyle Rudolph, players like that, Michael Mayer. But this is a very interesting spot for this tight end room because we don't necessarily know what role they're going to play because there's just a bunch of different personnel in this room with a bunch of different skill sets. This is a very interesting one that'll start to get sorted out at the start of next week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Trev. And so are we going to see the unit be thrown to as much, more, less? Does 12 personnel look different this year than it did last year, where there was like kind of always a movement piece?
Yeah.
Is it just the, Flanagan on the edge, just kind of hammering people? Or could we maybe see some scenarios where they do 13 personnel more? if the Flanagans are both healthy, in certain situations. Like if James Flanagan is the player you and I think he can be, and if Cooper Flanagan is healthy, you have a lot more red zone options than maybe you did last year.
Mm-hmm.
Or after your starter, Eli Raridan, your next couple tight ends were wing guys. Ty Washington and Jack Larson, and your freshman wasn't ready. Well, then you get to the Pitt game. James Flanagan's a little bit more seasoned. I mean, we saw him in fall camp, Trev, and there's a lot of times James Flanagan didn't look like he knew what he was doing. Why? He wasn't an early enrollee. He was, right. That was like literally the first time we saw him, that first practice, and you're like, James is lost. Well, why weren't other guys lost? They had 15 practices in the spring. They had been in the system for a while. It was brand new to him. By the end of the year, though, he looked, like a dude in the run game. Does it look different now? How are they going to be used? Are they going to be more of a factor in the red zone and short yardage situations? Will they be less of a factor in the pass game? More of a factor in the pass game? Will they be as much movement pieces? Will they do more things where you've got Flanagan and Flanagan right beside each other because you're trying to create that real hard edge with two big physical blockers, something you didn't always have last year when you had Ty Washington and Eli Red on the field. Not that they weren't good or they weren't. It's just it's a different skill set. These guys have a different skill set than last year's tight ends did in a lot of different ways. So I'm curious to see how they're going to be used, Trev. It's not so much that they're going to be good or bad. It's like I just want to see how they're going to be used. I think it's going to look different this year. And then how does that fit into the offense? That's the other thing.
Absolutely. Or another option, probably third on this list, but is it more situational based? If they're more of in a situation where it has to be run heavy, are we going to see more of the Flanagans? If it's more pass heavy, do we see an Ian Premer level of a breakout if he gets here in fall camp and really picks things up? Is that the role that Jack Larson has carved out for himself?
Does Ty Washington force himself into more pass catching situations now that he goes into year 2 in the system?
Right.
Those are all big questions. And in the spring, Trev, when we talk about what role they're going to play, how those guys perform is going to tell us exactly what the answer to your question is. Well, I don't know if we're going to see as much of Ty Washington this year, or we may see more of Ty Washington. What's going to determine that? How well he performs in the spring? Because guess who wasn't at practice last spring? Ty Washington. Now, he was out there, but he, at some of the practices, but he wasn't here yet fully because he was still in the transfer process. He was a guy that had to finish some stuff up at Arkansas. So when you look at it, the Pitt game, they used 3 tight ends a lot. They used Eli Raridan, Ty Washington, and James Flanagan. Last spring, 2 of those 3 guys were not practicing. One of them wasn't even on campus at all, in James Flanagan. How does that impact the room this year? And then a guy that you thought was going to be a factor for you last year didn't practice in the spring because he was injured in Cooper Flanagan. So the room is going to look very different than it did a year ago. Because a year ago, no Ty Washington, no James Flanagan, no Cooper Flanagan. You got to get all the way down to Jack Larson before you get to a guy that was going through practice last year. Now, what did Jack Larson do last spring? He did some good things. Can he build on that? We'll see. So it's not a good, bad, and different. It's literally an unknown. And the answer to it is going to be determined by how well they play. Because here's the thing. You're not just competing against each other. You're competing against Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter and Jaden Greathouse and guys like that because, look, we're going to do 11 personnel more this year because of how good these guys are, and the tight ends aren't giving us a reason. That could be something the coaches say. Or, hey, guys, I know we got some really good receivers, and we're going to do more 11. We might even do some 10. But when James and Cooper are on the field together, or James and Ty, or Ty and Cooper, or whatever, dude, we're just moving people. And they're doing enough in the pass game where we can do some things off play action this year with the Flanagans. You got a 6'7" and a 6'6" kid running down the field, potentially on some 12 personnel play action situations. So those things are all going to factor into how they're used, how they perform. And I'm looking forward to it because I think there's better talent in this room than maybe a lot of Notre Dame fans appreciate. I don't think Ty Washington gets enough respect for the solid job he did this year and how much he might be able to improve in year 2. I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about how big of a recruit James Flanagan was because we're so excited to see Ian Premer. And obviously we haven't seen Cooper Flanagan in a while. I think this room is going to be really good. Ian Premer is in no part of the conversation right now because this is a spring question mark, and Ian won't be here this spring. This is going to be about what do we see from Cooper Flanagan? What do we see from James Flanagan? What do we see from Ty Washington? And what do we see from Jack Larson? That's the big question this spring.
Let's kind of broaden the view a little bit here for our fifth question. And it was something that you touched on when we were talking about replacing Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And it's how well can Notre Dame make the expected adjustment scheme-wise and emphasis-wise? I think that's going to be another piece of this that I think is going to be very, very interesting when we're talking about the questions that we have about this unit going into it. I think with some fans, there's just this broad assumption that Mike Denbrock is just going to roll the footballs out and do the same thing that he did last year because they broke a school record in yards per play, and they set a modern-day school record for points in it per game over the course of the season. But your personnel is going to look different. You're going to have an older quarterback. You're going to have a more diverse skill set in the wide receiver room, and you don't have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And like we just established, the tight end room is wide open, and you're going to have a different-looking offensive line. So what's that going to look like schematically for Notre Dame's offense? I think that's another question that's worth addressing here that hopefully they get answered or start to answer in the spring.
Yeah, Trev, I don't know what's going on with spring with StreamYard today, but I can't hear you anymore. It'll take me off of the mic and I couldn't hear. So I didn't hear what you were talking about. I know that you went into 0.5, so I apologize if I missed this, but here's the reality. This is going to be a very different looking offense. And it goes all the way back to number one, how good the offensive line could be or not. Number two, replacing Love and Price, all those things. Number three, how much the receivers step up. Number four, what role do the tight ends play? All those things lead to your offense is going to look different.
Yeah.
Mid-zone has been the bread and butter run the last 2 years. Okay, why? Because they felt that's what their running backs did best and their line blocked well. Maybe this year they go back to some more gap scheme because it fits the skill set better. Maybe they run more inside zone duo this year because they think that better fits Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young and Nolan James. Maybe they do more 12 personnel this year. Maybe they do less 12 personnel this year. Maybe they do some 11 personnel that looks different. Maybe they do 10 personnel that looks different. And schematically, what are you going to do differently? What's the focus of the offense going to be this year? Does the slot get back to being a more heavier targeted position? Does the boundary get more, focused? Does the field get more focused? Does the tight end get more focused? And if it does, how? Are you going to use Quincy Porter and Micah Gilbert the same exact way you use Malachi Fields? I hope not, because they're different players. Not better, not worse, just different players. So I think all those things factor in. Like even if Cooper Flanagan and James Flanagan have great springs, they're very different players from Eli Raridan stylistically. So what you're going to do in the pass game with them is going to be a whole lot different. Eli Raridan was a force down the field. They went 8 of 8 on targets of him beyond 20 yards. 8 of 8. I don't know that you're going to see that from the tight ends this year. I think here's like, oh man, did you see that in cut that Cooper had and CJ just threw it up and only Cooper could catch it? Or did you see that play where they ran a little under screen? James Flanagan broke 4 tackles on his way to, they're different players. All those things are going to make it to where scheme-wise, emphasis-wise, it's just going to look different. And the spring is the first chance they get to figure out what that's going to be. There's going to be things they do this spring they think they're good at that they end up not being great at. There's going to be some things this spring that they look at as this is a complementary play that they're just going to go crush the defense with, or it just works at a higher level. You start scouting yourself in the spring like, dude, in practices, we didn't think we were going to be as heavy of a counter team this year or the gap scheme team this year, but man, our guys were blocking it. Did you see how well that play looked with Anthony Knapp getting out on the perimeter, pulling on that play? Like, dude, there's all types of different things that you're going to learn about your team that adjust that. And that's what's so important about the spring is you get to work on it. Like, I really think we can be good at this, but let's go rep it out without the pressure of a game on Saturday. Because when you get to the season, like, dude, I know we're good at this. So we're going to keep running this. Spring is a time where like, dude, I wish we could have had more of this in the offense. What are ways we can get that incorporated into our offense? Now's the perfect time to start figuring that stuff out. And that'll be a big part of this spring as well.
Final question that we have about this offensive unit in the spring that will have to start get answered, and I'm excited to watch it unfold. Who outside of CJ Carr are going to step up and be the leaders of this offensive unit? Because look, Notre Dame is walking into a position where on top of Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love, two leaders in their own rights of the offense, you also lost all three of your offensive captains. Defense, you get two of them back. Drake Bowen and Adon Schuler will be back in 2026. On the offensive side of the ball, it's a little bit different of an outlook. Emil Wagner was a team voted captain. Billy Schrouth was a team voted captain. And Will Pauling, a transfer, and not a transfer quarterback. A transfer receiver was also a team voted captain by his peers, which is just a really impressive honor to get, really being on campus for less than a year. All
Didn't
things
start.
considered.
Wasn't a starter at the beginning of the season.
Exactly. So Notre Dame is now in a position where you need people to step up from a captain's perspective, because it's twofold. We've seen through the Here Comes the Irish documentary and Marcus Freeman talking about it in press conferences. He will have weekly meetings with the captain, say, hey, what's kind of state of the state right now? What's the conversations going on in the locker room? He relies on them. They're an extension of himself. Then also for the captains on offense, who did Notre Dame rely on in bigger moments to make plays? Who were the leaders that they relied on? Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Billy Schrouth. Will Pauling didn't lead the wide receiver room in touchdowns last year by accident. It was clear that he became a focal point of that offense, whether people love it or hate it because it should have been Jaden Greathouse or they wished it was Jaden Greathouse. That aside, he stepped up in some moments. Now, who does that this year? And that will also start to get answered this spring as well.
Look, we know CJ is going to be a leader of the team. I'm pretty confident Ashton Craig will be as well, but here's the deal. We don't know how much Ashton Craig is going to be available this spring, and he'll provide great leadership in the room and on the field, but at the end of the day, we're talking about guys that are going to be providing that on-field leadership. Once he comes back, we'll see it, but then what if he gets hurt again? But to your point, Trev, we have some ideas. I think Jaden Greathouse can be that guy. Obviously, Jordan Faison can be that guy. Who is it at running back? Because it's not even just captains. Who's the leader of the running back group? Is it Aeneas? Well, Aeneas practices hard. Okay, cool. Does he have the off-field maturity, the on-field maturity? Does Kedron? Does Nolan? I mean, again, I'm not saying guys do or don't. I'm saying those are the questions that we have. Some guys step into leadership roles and it hurts their game because they just they're not comfortable with it. Like, hey, I just want to go play ball, man. You know, like those are all like, what kind of does Anthony Knapp start to step into a leadership role? Does Gerby? I mean, those are all questions. Who's the leader of the tight end room? Is it Cooper Flanagan? Is it Ty Washington? Like, it's not just about of the unit as a whole. You're going to spend a lot of time with just your group look, Ashton Craig could be the best offensive line captain Notre Dame's had in 30 years. But guess what? There's going to be a lot of times when he's not in the room with the running backs or the tight ends or the wide receivers. Who are the leaders when those guys are together? Who are the leaders holding, those guys accountable? You can't ask Ashton Craig to hold every receiver and every tight end accountable. That's got to start with the leaders in the room. That's got to be Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison. That's got to be, whether it's Cooper Flanagan, Ty Washington. I don't care if it's Jack Larson or James Flanagan. I don't care who it is. It doesn't always have to be the oldest guy. Maybe it's Aeneas at running back. Maybe it's Nolan James Jr. I don't know the answer to that question. But who steps into those roles is going to have a major impact on how this offense does from achieving its full potential standpoint, because that's leadership is what gets you to put into work to the maximum degree in the offseason. Leadership is what helps keep you focused. Leadership is what helps keep the locker room together. Leadership is how you overcome adversity. Leadership is the poise you show when the game is on the line in the fourth quarter on the road against Miami, or late in the game against Texas A&M, or in the playoffs, or semifinals, championship game, whatever. And that game against Northern Illinois where you're down and you just need somebody to step up and do something. What was the biggest complaint we had in that game? Where's the leadership? Where's the guys that are going to step up and make the plays that need to be made? I want a receiver. That's what you were talking about this the other day, and I loved it. Where Malachi, think of the stones that it takes for Malachi Fields to look at Mike Denbrock and say, don't overthink it. Throw me the ball. And then for Mike Denbrock to be like, who the F are you I'm the coach. But what did Mike Denbrock do? Okay. Why? Because Malachi had earned that trust that he can say that to me. And he didn't do it in a disrespectful manner. He wasn't like, don't be an idiot, throw me the ball. He's like, don't overthink it, coach. Get me the rock. And Mike Denbrock said, cool. All right. You want it? Let's bring it to you. A guy can walk up to the coach and say, I want the ball. And he's like, go sit down. You got to earn, you know what I mean? Like, you got to earn that trust. Who are those guys this year? And I think how many step into that role is going to determine in a lot of ways how good this team can be. Because sometimes, Trev, it's like, I think we're talking about this a couple weeks ago where, like, I don't think Mike Denbrock was like the best X's and O's offensive coordinator Rams ever had in the last 10, 15 years. You could argue Chip Long and Tommy Rees in some ways both had more creative scheme. But what have we said about Mike Denbrock? He's the best offensive coordinator they've had. And I would argue best in-game play caller. And why? Because I think Mike Denbrock has always had a very good understanding of who's hot, how to get the most out of his players, how to build around his team. And he's been very good at establishing trust, getting players to realize you can be this. Because I think Mike Denbrock understands that, yes, I'm a smart guy. I'm a confident, cocky guy. And I think I'm really good at this. But at the end of the day, I also know sometimes we just need to line up and say, it doesn't matter what I call. Because I'm running behind this guy, this guy, and this guy. And honestly, it doesn't matter what I call. Because I know that Gerby and whoever are going to knock those guys off the line. I know that, dude, I'm going to get Jaden Greathouse in a one-on-one, and I know he's going to win. Or I know that if we hand the ball off to Aeneas in this situation, or Keegan or Nolan in this situation, they're going to get me a yard. And that's a great place to be as a play caller, where it's like, dude, I don't have to outsmart the other coach all the time. Sometimes it's just, it doesn't matter what we run here. I know we're going to get it done because I know that I can run behind this guy and this guy. And I know I can hand the ball to that guy or throw the ball to this guy. Sometimes it doesn't matter. And when you get to that point as a coordinator, it's like, it doesn't really matter what I call here. I know they're going to go get the job done. Or, hey, you know, I don't care what the call is. I got this matchup where I know they can't guard my guy. And my guy's going to make that play. It's a great place to be. That's another part of leadership. To be able to say, hey, coach, you know what to do. Call this play for number 1 or number 6 or 22 or whatever. You know what to do, coach. Let's go get it done. And then to be able to look at 13 and say, I know he's going to get it where it needs to go. I mean, think about 2024. I mean, who was that guy in 2024? Sometimes it was Jaden Greathouse, sometimes the face-off, sometimes it was Jaden Thomas. But you know what the common denominator was in almost every big moment? 13. Riley Leonard. Right? I mean, it's like Riley will get the ball where it needs to get to. He may have missed 5 straight throws, but I know on 4th down he's going to make the throw. You know what I mean? That's kind of what he was, or I'm going to run it to him. And now CJ's got to establish himself as that guy. I think in a lot of ways he did last year, but it'll be different this year. All those things are part of this draft.
Folks, that's going to do it for part 2 of today's show. Don't go anywhere. We're getting ready to talk some recruiting and some big picture college football. But before we get there, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 3 of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, we're talking about the kind of the outlook on Notre Dame's recruiting approach in 2027 and 2028. Now, so far throughout the offseason, there's been one consistent that we've talked about. Yes, we've mentioned North Carolina and recruiting down south in Texas and Florida and having wins in Pennsylvania, but one consistent has been the Chicago area. That is a place over the next couple seasons that Notre Dame has to win because it's in their backyard. And Brian, I know you were doing some research before the show. That is also an area that historically Notre Dame has also had a lot of success in. They need to get back to that.
Yeah, and it's not their fault that the success hasn't been there. I mean, one of the struggles that Notre Dame has when it comes to recruiting at an elite level is, and one thing that makes it harder, it's not so much the whole you can't get guys into school nonsense. Reggie Bush had no problem getting into Notre Dame. Reggie Bush just didn't want to come to Notre Dame because he wanted to play for a winner. And at the time, Notre Dame was kind of garbage. But in other eras, Reggie Bush, like if Reggie Bush was come along now, he'd be a lot more interested in Notre Dame than he was in 2002. Same thing with other players. There's been plenty of guys. Christian Wilkins was a guy that did not give Notre Dame the time of day. Well, he went to Clemson. He clearly doesn't care about academics. He went to a private school, I believe, in high school, and the guy graduated with 2 degrees at Clemson. 2 degrees. So was it an academic issue for him? No, it wasn't. He wanted to play for a championship caliber football team when he was coming out of high school. Notre Dame wasn't it. So that's never been my concern. The concern, the challenge is that you just can't drive an hour in any direction or 2 hours in any direction and run into a bunch of dudes. That's been a problem. When it was funny when Clemson, I forget which team of theirs I was studying, but I was studying a Clemson team. I think it might have been the 18 team. And I looked and it was like something like 90% of their roster was either from South Carolina, a state that borders South Carolina, or a direct state that borders that state. So it was like Florida counts. So it's like South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, North Carolina. A huge chunk of their roster were from those states. Louisiana falls under there. You put about a 4 to 5 hour radius around South Carolina, and they're absolutely around Clemson and loaded with talent. Same thing with Georgia. Same thing with Alabama. Same thing with Texas. Same thing with USC. They don't have to go very far to recruit studs. That's a much bigger issue for Notre Dame over the last 20 years. There's no local base. Indy hasn't been that for Notre Dame. South Bend's never going to be that. You'll get a guy here, a guy there, but it's never going to be a place where like you got on your roster, you got like 7 or 8 South Bend guys that are all dudes. There's been guys. Anthony Johnson on the 88 team, Braxton Cave, recently, Paul Moala. There's been guys, certainly. Basketball teams had a couple. It's more so, Trev, it's the volume. It's specific positions, especially D-line. That's really where it's been a major problem. D-line and receiver are areas where you got to a lot of times go far away. And when there have been big-time receivers, Notre Dame hasn't been able to get it done. You think of Cardinal Tate. You think of Taylon Taylor. That's been a big issue for Notre Dame. And Chicago used to be that for Notre Dame. Chicago used to be an area that would produce DBs, receivers, running backs, and especially linemen for Notre Dame. You go back to the 1988 team, Trev. Think of some of the guys from Chicago. Chris Zorich, obviously Tim Grunard. Don Grimm was on that 88, 89 team. Stan Smagala was a Chicago guy. You think of the 1993 team. These are just some of the names of, and when we say Chicago, we're talking Chicago and like you put like about a 40-minute, maybe 30-mile radius around like a lot of the suburban areas like Bolingbrook and Elmhurst and places like that. Look at the 1993 team. Bryant Young, Brian Hamilton, Oliver Gibson. That's like 3 of your starting defensive linemen in the 1993 team. Pete Bursich, a starting linebacker. Lindsey Knapp was a starting offensive lineman. Mirko Jurkovic was on that team. Robert Farmer, Ronaldo Wynn, Jeremy Sample. These were all really good football players. And there were times in the 80s where you're getting 10, 15 guys from Chicago in your recruiting class. And so you used to have that. It used to be where Notre Dame could go to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois and just load up. And then they could go get the Derek Browns from Florida and the Pat Terrells from Florida. But like, Tony Rice from South Carolina. You look at the 1988 team, the last title team, and you had Ricky Waters at running back. He was from Pennsylvania. Anthony Johnson was from Indiana. You look at your wide receivers. Actually, Ricky Waters was a wide receiver. Pennsylvania. Rocket Ismail was from Pennsylvania. You had a lot of guys from the north. And then you'd get the occasional, Derek Brown's from Florida, Mark Green's from California. You get those occasional guys, but for the most part, a big chunk of your football team was from the north. It's just never going to consistently be that way anymore. Rodney Culver was from Michigan. because we've talked about before, demographic changes. You follow the jobs, follow industry. A lot of steel and coal's no longer in the North like it used to be. A lot of the car manufacturing that used to dominate the North is not there. It is what it is. But Chicago is an area, Trev, that was probably the one that was the biggest surprise because it is still a pretty heavily populated area, heavily populated state. I've heard different people propose, why did Chicago stop producing big-time football players? Sean Davis and I have talked about that. Sean had a very interesting theory that we're talking recently. Is like, what we're seeing now is the Michael Jordan effect has worn off in Chicago the last 5 to 10 years. And what I mean by that is there was a time when if you were a 6'2", 6'3" elite athlete from Chicago, you were going to go play basketball because you wanted to be the next Michael Jordan. This is a big-time state. I think also what you've seen, and this one I can attest to, coaching in the Chicago area has gotten way better. Way better. There's now more people like former Notre Dame defensive lineman Kerry Neal that are investing into young people in Illinois. Kerry Neal could probably make more money if he moved south. There's just more players to train. But he's invested in that area and developing young people in that area. So development is getting better. Coaching is getting better. The private schools are starting to put more money into staff and all these type of things to get kids up. And now more kids are starting to play football at a younger age. And so it's having an impact on what you're seeing. And then there's just some demographic changes. But we're in an era right now where over the next 2 years, and it hasn't been true in past years, there's a kid here you could have got, wish they could have got Justin Scott, wish they could have got Carnell Tate. But what we haven't seen is Chicago have the volume of talent to where if you want to have a number 1 ranked recruiting class, you want to have a class that's built, that's elite, that can be championship caliber, you've got to crush it in Chicago. That's true now in 27 and 28. And it's imperative that Notre Dame not only has success, but crushes it in Chicago over the next couple years. It's imperative because if they can hit home runs in Chicago the next 2 years, you're landing not just good players, elite players, top 50 players at multiple positions, and none of them are offensive linemen. D linemen, receivers, DBs. That's the difference, Trev. And that's why Chicago is important, because for the first time in a while, there's a home base area that has loads of big-time players. You got to tap into it.
It's imperative. Notre Dame has to be the program to beat for star players coming out of Chicago in both the 27 and the 28 class. I think that's what feeds into this success conversation that we're having about what Notre Dame has in front of them as far as opportunities and landing recruits. Some people view dominance as you go and land every single player that we go and talk about over the next 20 to 25 minutes that are in both the 27 and 28 class. In an ideal world, sure. But for players like David Fuller-Unshu and Quentin Burrell and players like that who Notre Dame have a very strong case in landing in the 2027 class, they have to be in the top 3 or the top 2 at the bare minimum for these guys. Notre Dame has to be that program to beat, just like how Georgia was a team to beat for players that they've gotten out of Georgia. Just like how USC is a team to beat for recruits that they want to pull out of California. That's what Notre Dame has to be for the Chicago area recruits. But Brian, let's dive into some of these top prospects, and we'll start with the 2027 class. And to your point, there's no offensive linemen there, but we are going to start talking about some players that are in the trenches, because this D-line class over the next 2 years, the D-line prospects are outstanding coming out of Chicago.
One of the differences in Chicago right now compared to the past, and what makes it different than Indianapolis and Fort Wayne, is you're having a group of kids coming along that not only are big-time linemen, but guys that actually fit Notre Dame. There's a very talented defensive lineman out of Indianapolis a couple of years ago, but he wasn't at all a fit at Notre Dame. And they told him, you want to get in here, you got to do A, B, C, and D in the classroom, and he literally did C and D in the classroom. Now, that gets you into LSU, but that won't get you into Notre Dame. What you're seeing is guys that either already are academic fits or guys like a Chris Burgess where they say, hey, look, you want to get to Notre Dame, you need to do A, B, C, and D in the classroom, and he nails it. Does it all because he wants to be at Notre Dame. And then some guys are just already there. it's that high-level talent combined with Notre Dame fits, because a lot of these guys we're going to talk about, Trev, are private school kids. And why does that matter? Because you're getting better prepared to handle the workload at Notre Dame if you're in a situation like that. So when you look at the defensive line, you talk about David Fuller-Runshoe and Braden Parks in the 27 class. Well, David Fuller-Runshoe is from St. Patrick. Braden Parks is from Brother Rice, 2 private schools. They're massive. David Fuller-Runshoe is 6'4", 280. He'll be 300 pounds like it's nothing. Braden Parks is listed at 6'3", he's listed at 6'3", 295. I think he's probably, if he's not 300 pounds now, he will be when he shows up at Notre Dame. There's no doubt about that. They're big-time players. David Fuller-Runshoe by Rivals is listed as the number 13 player in the country. The highest ranking for Braden Parks is 128. It's consensus 4-star. I would argue he should be ranked a little bit higher than that, but these are 2 big-time football players. It's not very often that you can get in your car, drive less than 2 hours, and there's 2 top 100 defensive tackles that you can get to. And that just puts – and Notre Dame's – I would say right now, as of today, I believe Notre Dame is the leader for both guys. You've got to close the deal on these 2 kids. That right there is at the foundation. And there's some other kids that we're going to talk about, but you're a trench, right, line-driven program. You got 2 studs at Catholic schools right down the street. Got to get them. And so that's why it starts there. But then you go to what's the other position that Notre Dame has struggled to consistently recruit big-time players? Wide receivers. Once again, you've got another one right down the street. Academically, good to go. Tall, 6'2 plus. You saw him last year at Irish Invasion. Built well, dominant high school player. A lot of the kind of good swagger you want from a guy. And that's Quentin Burrell, who, again, top 100 player. He's ranked as number 83 overall player by Rivals. He's ranked number 43 overall by ESPN. Top 100 player, Mount Carmel, right down the street, big-time player. He's being recruited by a lot of other schools. But, again, as of today, I like where Notre Dame is at. You've got to close the deal. So, those are 3 big-time players. And then there's a couple other kids in Chicago this year that I'm very intrigued by, Trev. One is Tavares Harrington, which is a very interesting situation. Sean will speak more on this on the board, but they were early on a top school for Tavares, and then they just fell off. He just wasn't looking at them. And we didn't really understand why. Sean and I talked today, and we finally got a reason why, and that is Tavares wanted to play corner. Alabama flat out told him, well, dude, you're a corner for us. Notre Dame was like, look, we're going to give you a shot at corner, but we're going to be honest with you. We also think, maybe you might fit here. And so what's come to the realization, according to Sean, is that I think Tavares is now more open to the idea of not just being a corner. And then the hiring of Aaron Henry, who he already had a good relationship from his time at Illinois, has allowed Notre Dame to get back in the mix to where now Tavares is saying publicly Notre Dame and Alabama are his top 2 schools. A month ago, Notre Dame wasn't even the top 3 or 4, in my opinion. Now, I think Notre Dame is right there. They've got to close. He set 2 visits for the spring. They're making a hard charge for him. This is a 6'3" kid who I would give a chance to play corner. I still think he's better at safety. I'd give him a chance to play corner if he's not gonna stick there, move him to safety. He's a really good football player. Also a teammate of Quentin Burrell. Now, they're not recruiting Tavares Harrington because of Quentin Burrell. If Quentin Burrell told them tomorrow, hey, I ain't coming, they're still going to keep recruiting Tavares Harrington because they like him a lot. But it helps. You get one, it's not going to hurt with the other one. I don't know that it's a deal breaker, they're going to go to school together, but it doesn't hurt. He's another one that I think could be a very, very important part to this class, and a guy that's not maybe ranked quite as high. He's ranked 129 by Rivals on 3. He's ranked number 96 by ESPN. Maybe he's not quite in that top 50 to 75 range, but this is a top 100 caliber player, another top 100 caliber player, also from a private school in Chicago area. Academics are fine. Tavares is good there. These kids, from what I've been told, they're all good there in that regard in the 27 class. Those are guys that you've got to really hammer it with. Now, one guy from Mount Carmel that Notre Dame is trying to recruit is Roman Igwe Buikwe. Very talented player, a bit raw, but very talented. he's the one that right now they're not in a great place with. They're trying to get in the mix there, but they're well behind 3-4 other schools right now. For him, I'd like to see them continue to try to work there. But to me, you look at these 5 guys, Trev, you got to get at least 3 of them. And I would argue I want 4. That's going to be key. If you get 4 of the 5 guys we're just talking about, those are big-time football players. And I know I'm greedy, but Fuller Runshoe and Braden Parks, I think, are absolute must-gets. I think Quentin Burrell's a must-get. And Tavares Harrington could be the difference between having a really good DB class or an elite DB class. He could be that 4th or 5th guy. He brings that versatility that they love. He can play corner. He can play safety. He's got that length that you love. He's 6'3". You know, the tools are there. I think you got to get 4 of those 5 guys. I'm not really counting on Roman right now being in the class, but Notre Dame's got to do what they got to do to get those other 4 guys. Have to, in my opinion. That's huge.
4 of those 5 is what you would consider a successful 2027 recruiting cycle out of Chicago?
I would say 3 out of 5 I would count as successful.
Okay.
4 out of 5 is like, okay, now you crushed it. You know, like you go 2 out of 5. That's you didn't live up. You didn't do what you needed to do. 3 of 5, that's a success. 4 out of 5 is like, okay, that's what you need to do big time. You're not going to get every guy. It's not reality. I don't care. And it wasn't that way in the 70s or 80s. There were kids from Chicago that went to other schools, but you've got to clean up for the most part. So that's why I say 3 out of 5 is a successful. 4 out of 5 is like, okay, now you're once again competing for that needle moving, gap closing. Now we're stacking classes, baby, type of haul out of Chicago. And I think if you do that, it then helps you in 28. It helps you in 29 to really keep this thing rolling.
Let's move it back a class and talk about the 2028 group of kids, because again, Chicago, it's not just for 2027. Notre Dame could stack recruiting classes solely based on what they do in Chicago. And again, we're going to start on the defensive line. And the first person, Brian, is somebody that you and I a couple of weeks ago sat down and watched film of together. Dude, Cam McGee is legit. Goodness gracious. I didn't believe you that he was a 2028 kid. I thought he was a 27 kid. I really did.
Yeah, he's a big-time player. There's no doubt about it. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know how anyone – actually, I'm going to go look and see what Brother Rice did on defense last year, because Brother Rice football team last year was absolutely ridiculous. So Brother Rice is obviously home to Braden Parks. We talked about that. Cam McGee is a big-time football player. And when you look at Brother Rice this past season, not only they have those guys, but they also had King Liggins, who's a D tackle that I liked. If Notre Dame would have taken King as the 3rd D tackle, I'd have been perfectly fine with that. They decided to not bring him in. I think he's just a little bit smaller than they liked. He's going to Illinois. I'd have been very happy if King Liggins would have picked Notre Dame, like very happy. And then Cam McGee, I'm like, how do you score on that team? And then you look at their season, and there were some games they gave up points, but they won the state title game 16-0. You're like, oh yeah, okay, that's them playing the way they need to. 3 of their 5 playoff games were shutouts, and the other 2 playoff games, the opponent scored 18 and 17 points. So it's kind of like, yeah, they kind of did what you think they would do. And in the 2 games, they gave up double digits, and one of them, the other team got to double digits in the 4th quarter. Game was basically over. So I don't think they scored double digits against the starting defensive line. But Trev, like, look, Cam McGee is a kid that is a national recruit, elite 5-star kid. Not just my opinion, but that's the consensus. And there's 2 of those in that class. But he's ranked as the number 8 player in the country by Rivals on 3. He's ranked as the number 15 player in the country by 247. If there's 14 better players in the country in 2028 than Cam McGee, then this is going to be an incredibly good recruiting class nationally. This is a legit top 10 player. This is the twitchy, elite, get after edge rusher that you just don't have outside of maybe once a decade in a 3-hour radius around South Bend. Whatever it takes to get Cam McGee to Notre Dame, you got to do it. Now, I believe him and Braden Parks obviously are close and they're teammates and all that, but you're not recruiting Braden Parks to get Cam McGee. You're recruiting Braden Parks to get Braden Parks. But that's what also makes Braden Parks more important, because if he comes to Notre Dame and likes it, then that only helps your chances. But this is a national recruit. You're not just recruiting against Illinois and Wisconsin and Michigan for him. You're going to have to beat Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, Georgia. I mean, everybody's going to come after Cam McGee. And so now it's about laying the groundwork now to make sure that when decision time comes, nobody's outworked you for him. You got to get this done. Kids like this are rare for anyone. They're especially rare for Notre Dame in regard to being this close. You had to go to North Carolina to get guys like him in the past couple of years. You usually have to go down to Florida, Georgia, Texas to get kids like him. There's one less than 2 hours away at a Catholic school. Got to get it done. There's no more important recruit to them in the 28 class than Cam McGee, and Darian Prescott isn't far behind.
Darian Prescott's another dude that, again, when you start talking about the success of a class and what success will look like in 2028, being major players for both Cam McGee and Darian Prescott's going to be absolutely huge. Another highly touted recruit, very twitchy, freaky athlete. The fact that there's two of these in this class. Now, I don't know if I'm ready to put Darian Prescott on the level of Cam McGee yet. I think Cam McGee's just one of those generational athletes that's ahead of his time for being a 2028 kid. Like I said, when I popped in his film, I thought I was looking at a current high school senior.
Yep.
I truthfully did, but Darian Prescott's not too far behind, man. He's a talented player.
Darian Prescott's more of your typical sophomore elite talent in that kid's got he's 6'4", he's long, he's athletic, he's smart, but he's still raw. He's still got to get stronger. He's still kind of learning the game at a high level. He's still learning the technique. Like, he's that sophomore that's like, dude, in 2 years, he's a top 10 player. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Cam McGee looks like a senior right now, like the way he plays. Darian Prescott's more of the typical traditional type of player, but he's still a highly ranked guy. He's ranked number 16 in the country. He's from Bolingbrook High School. He's ranked number 16 in the country by Rivals on 3. He's ranked number 36 by 247 Sports, which means he's a 5-star player. You know, they don't give the number 16 player a 5-star now because it's, you know, their whole clickbait rollout. Like, oh, let's new 5-stars. The guy's ranking didn't change, but you have him as 5-star, whatever. It's different conversation for a different day. But this is a big time player. And here's what I love about it. Your 2 stud D linemen in 27 are tackles. The 2 stud defensive linemen in 28, and we'll get to another massive 28 defensive line recruit. I mean, that literally and figuratively. But the 2 studs you got to get in 28 are edge players, which means they can all play together. So, Trev, once again, you're talking about 4 big-time, top 100, game-changing, you can have an elite D-line if these kids are part of it, recruits, and they're all from the Chicago area. But we count Bolingbrook because, again, we put like that 30-mile radius outside of Chicago. That's all kind of part of it, and that's why, obviously, Darian Prescott falls into that because he's from Bolingbrook, which we count as the Chicago area. But that's another kid who's a 2-hour drive away from South Bend. Absolute must get. Now, he's going to get overshadowed a little bit because of Cam McGee, but he's no less important in my opinion. You got to get at least one of the 2, but I really think you need to get both of them in the 28 class. And neither of them are the biggest D linemen in the 28 class, Trev, if you look at it figuratively.
Yeah, that honor is going to have to go to Caleb Tucker. That guy's a mountain of a man. I mean, legitimately, he's from Mount Carmel. So what? That's the same high school as Quentin Burrell, correct?
Quentin Burrell, Tavares Harrington, Roman Igwe.
Okay. Caleb Tucker, and like you said, it's not just figuratively. He is gigantic. He's 6'5". I think on his on-3 profile, he's like 355 pounds. This kid is massive.
And he's every bit of that, Trev.
Yeah.
Every bit of that. I mean, he is legit 6'5", 350. It's funny because Sean went and saw him play, and this is before he blew up. And right now, you look at Caleb Tucker's recruiting ranking, he's blown up. He's ranked as the number 29 player in the country, according to On3. I don't know where I'd rank him yet. I haven't really got into that part of it yet. I haven't got into the recruiting rankings aspect of it yet. But he's a big-time player, and I'm actually, now that we're talking about these kids, Trev, I'm going to actually pull up a little bit of film of these guys. We'll watch while we're talking about them. But, you know, he calls me from the sideline, and he's like, B, you got to, you know, I got to talk to you about this kid. He hadn't played a whole lot. He's there to watch Quentin. He's there to watch Quentin Burrell. He's there to watch a couple other guys. I can't remember who they were playing because the team they were playing had some D linemen they were looking at too. He's like, they got this kid named Caleb, this big boy. And he had to go look up the kid's name because he wasn't really sure of who he was. And he's like, he's just tossing people. And then we found out he's a sophomore because he just thought he was like, I don't know, some senior that had just transferred, from out of the area or something like that. And he's a sophomore. And so it was like, dude, he's a dog. I mean, he's an absolute dog. So you're talking about a 6'5", 350-pound guy. Now, of the three, I think Caleb Tucker is the one where you might need the most work as far as kind of getting him to Notre Dame. But they're on him. They're definitely recruiting him, and that's going to be one of those ones for Charlie Partridge that you really look at. I'm going to pop some film. This is Cam McGee that you're kind of watching right now. But we just talked about 5 defensive linemen from Chicago over the next 2 years, Trev, that are all the only one that's not ranked as a top 100 player right now is Braden Parks. And I'm just telling you folks, Braden Parks is a top 100 player. Like, I don't care what anybody else says. He's a top 100 player. These are 5 big time players and they're right there. They're right there for the taking. You've got to clean up. And look, there's a lot that goes into it. You're building new relationships with them because you've got a new D-line coach. There's a lot of things that factor into that. I think how you perform this year on the field is going to have a big say in that. Notre Dame, and we're going to talk about this, at some point in time here soon on one of these midweek rundowns, where I think the 26th season is incredibly important for Notre Dame to continue the momentum they have on the recruiting trail. And I think that's especially true for the Chicago kids. And you've got to do whatever you can to get them on campus as much as possible. Absolutely as much as possible, because you've got to clean up. These are 5 big-time players, Trev, 5 big-time players. And they're not it. I mean, there's some other really good football players from Chicago in the 2028 class from Mount Carmel. They have a receiver from Mount Carmel in the 28 class named Marshawn Thornton that Notre Dame has offered. Is again, really good football player from Mount Carmel, teammate of Quentin Burrell, teammate of Caleb Tucker that Notre Dame has offered right now. 6-foot kid, 180 pounds, talented player. Got in Miami's already offered him, Michigan's already offered him, Notre Dame's already offered him. So this is a big time player. So it's not just there. And there's another one, and I'll tell you right now, if Notre Dame wants this kid, they better get him. By the way, the kid we're watching now, this is Cam McGee, is who we're watching now. Because we watched the 27 kids on film last week. But, there's a tight end to where if you want this kid, you better be able to get this kid. His name is Jack McNamara. Okay. You've already hit it there. He's Irish. Okay, right there. I mean, he's literally Irish. Sure. Not like he's committed to Irish. He's literally Irish. He's from Chicago, and he goes to a Catholic school, and he plays tight end. That's one you got to be able to go get. So, Jack McNamara is another interesting one. Now, I don't know where they are in the board in the tight end class in 2028. I know that they've offered Jack. I know he's going to be visiting this spring. I don't know if, they're in a position where they'd push for his commitment or not. And when I say I don't know, I genuinely mean I don't know. Not in a I'm not sure they're gonna because they may like other guys more. I mean, I literally don't know. I haven't had a chance to really dive into. I know who they like at tight end in the 28 class. I don't know what they are right now, numbers wise, what's the priorities or anything like that. But if you want this kid, you better be able to get him. But it's just another example of a very talented group of players in that 28 class that you look at and say, you've just got to be able to start getting some of these guys, Trev. You've got to be able to start getting some of these guys. There's too much talent in the area, too much elite talent in the area for Notre Dame not to get some of these guys. It has to happen. Has to happen.
Absolutely. We talked about what success looks like in the 2027 class. What would you kind of say for the 28 class? I know it's a little bit further down the road, but of the guys we talked about, what does success look like for that?
You got to get one of the DNs, minimum one of the DNs, and I think you got to get at least 2 overall, at least right now. It's still a little bit early, as you mentioned. Cam McGee is a guy that's already an elite player. David Fuller-Runshoe is turning into one. Notre Dame kind of got on him around the time a lot of other people did. Cam McGee is a little bit of a different animal. This film right here is of Darian Prescott, by the way. This is playoff highlights. But you've got to get one of McGee and Prescott, and I honestly think when it comes down to it, getting both is something that I'd like to see. That part of that depends on how the 27 class goes. I mean, if you get 3 big time ends on after getting Dunham and Utade, then I can live with only getting one of the 2. But I'd like to get both of them. Jack McNamara, and here's a part of it too, is I don't know where where the tight end board is in 28. So I can't say, if you don't get this kid, it's a bust. So I don't know who else is on the board. Like, I don't care who's on the board at defensive end in 28. Prescott and McGee are studs. They're must-gets. And then with Caleb Tucker, his situation is a little bit different. More work is going to need to be done to get him to Notre Dame at this time. So it's a little bit different than the 28 class, but eventually I think you're going to get to the point where I'm going to say, hey man, you're going to have to clean up. But over a 2-year period, we just talked about 9 guys. You've got to get at least 5 of them, if not 6, at least. And that's why I say Chicago is vitally, 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 vitally important to Notre Dame's success. And what you're seeing here from Darian Prescott, as we talked about, look at that get off. Talent is there. He's just a little bit more raw than Cam McGee is. But man, he's got he's going to be a 5-star recruit when it's all said and done, Trev. He's already ranked top 20 player now, but these 2 kids are absolute studs. And I think right now you're probably in a little bit better position with Prescott than McGee, but both of them like Notre Dame. And so I'm not sitting there tempering expectations of like, oh, I don't know if they're going to get this guy. It's way too early to be having the conversation of who they will and won't get. And then who else is going to be on the board at, D tackle and tight end. So that's why I'm a little bit less of got to nail 4 out of the 4 in the 28 class as I am the 27 class. That's where I'm at on that one.
Well, I think that's totally fair. Chicago's an area that Notre Dame's going to have to clean up and have a lot of success. Mm-hmm. I'm with you completely.
Yeah, and then before we move on, I just want you guys to see Caleb Tucker's film because you just need to see how big he is. We'll only watch a couple plays. It's like he's just massive. But then you watch him move for a kid that size, and you're like, whoa. Like
one of the things that I like too about both defensive ends and their fit at Notre Dame is they're both really good against the run too. Like obviously their pass rushing skill set is really good.
Yep.
But we've been talking throughout the offseason about, hey, I don't really have a whole lot of questions about Boubacar or Bryce's ability against the pass rush. So what can they do against the run? And both Cam McGee and Darian Prescott have just lengthy highlight videos also about what they do against the run.
That's a big key, Trev, because you don't want one-trick ponies. You want guys who can do it all. And you want guys that like to do it all. You can teach a guy that maybe – this is Caleb Tucker, by the way, guys, 6'5", 350. But you can eventually, get a guy who just wants to rush quarterback. You can eventually get him to the right place of mind where it's like, okay, I understand I got to be good at everything and all that kind of stuff. But what you'd rather have is a guy that comes into your program as like okay, I'm dominating in everything I do. And that's the thing about Prescott and Cam McGee is that they are both have elite pass rushing potential. But what makes them 5 stars, in my opinion, is they dominate in everything. To your point, Trev, they're dominant run defenders. They play with attitude in the run game, and have elite potential. Cam's already an elite pass rusher. Darian has elite pass rushing potential. I would actually argue right now he's even better against the run than he is the pass because that just is like I'm better than you and I'm playing hard and I'm doing that. Like he's a force against the run. The pass rushing pieces, he's got all the tools to be an elite pass rusher. Now he's just got to learn the game, refine the technique and learn some counter moves and all that kind of stuff. So that's the difference there with those guys is you just need to be able to kind of put it all together and get to that point in time. But they all want to be great players. And as you're seeing from this film of Caleb Tucker, he's not just some 350-pound kid that you just put in the nose and just say, stand there and eat up double teams. And that's it. Of course, you're going to ask him to do that.
Right.
But this is a kid that can make plays too, right? Like there's a difference between Terrence Cody and Jordan Davis. Like there's a difference between Terrence Cody and Dexter Lawrence in that they're both elite at what you ask them to do. But one of them is a guy that literally just our linebackers are going to make a million plays because this guy eats up double teams. And the other one is, yeah, that's also true, but I can also make plays. And that's the kind of potential that Caleb Tucker brings to the table. And then here's the thing I love too, Trev, is every single kid we've shown you so far comes from a great program. I mean, Brother Rice and Mount Carmel both won state championships last year. And I was under the impression that one of them didn't win it. but because I mean they're both private schools in Chicago, so I just was working with the assumption of they couldn't have both won it, but they're in different divisions, they're in different leagues, so they literally both won state championships last year. So Caleb Tucker's got a state championship already. Cam McGee's got a state championship already. Quentin Burrell, Tavares Harrington, and then Bolingbrook, where Darren Prescott went last year, went 9-3 and made it to, I think, the state semifinals and lost to Frem by a point. So these kids all come from winning programs. They expect to be like, hey, we want to compete for championships. We want to win football games. And that's why it's important that Notre Dame go give them a reason. Why do you need to go to Georgia? Why do you need to go all the way to Columbus? Why do you need to go to Austin? Why do you need to go to Tuscaloosa to play for championship when you can come right here in our backyard and play for championship? What's key for Notre Dame is they can't go into these recruitments and you have to understand, like, just because these kids are from Chicago doesn't, sometimes coaches from Notre Dame in the past, they've kind of gotten to a point where they discredit the Chicago kids a little bit because they fall in love with like the national kids. I'm going to pull up some Tavares Harrington film real quick, and we'll watch that as we're finishing up, since we haven't watched Tavares' film yet. Notre Dame has to understand, like, don't take a top 100 guy from Atlanta when you can take a top 100 guy from Chicago. Don't take a top 150 guy from Texas when you can take a top 150 guy from Chicago. That's where I look at it. And that's what I hope the mindset that Notre Dame develops, Trev, because you've got to you've got to basically put a wall around the Chicago area and say, if there's a kid from this area that we want, we're going to get him. And we want him. And that's going to be the key for me for Notre Dame is you got to want all these Chicago kids. And don't assume that because they're from Chicago that you're going to get them. Recruit them like you're recruiting a kid from Florida. Recruit them like this is Tavares Harrington, by the way, who plays deep corner for Mount Carmel. You got to recruit them like they're studs from Miami or studs from Atlanta or Dallas. That's how you got to treat them. Don't just assume you're going to get the hometown discount, or, well, of course they're going to go to Notre Dame, because Michigan and Ohio State have been cleaning your clock lately with top Chicago kids in a lot of instances. Bama's come up and got Chicago kids. Miami's come up and got the last 5-star defensive lineman from Chicago that Notre Dame recruited went to Miami, not Notre Dame. And so you've got to treat these kids like they are stars, studs that they are, the muskets that they are, and do what it takes to get them on campus. That's going to be the big thing for Notre Dame. Look at that plant and drive. That's really impressive for a 6'3" kid, Trev. So yeah, Tavares Harrington can play, and they faded for a while there with him. I'm glad to see that they've rallied back with Tavares because he's a good football player. And I love versatile players, Trev, and he can literally play corner and safety for you. He's that kind of player. He's a really good football player.
Fits the mold of what Notre Dame's bringing in at DB over the last several seasons. Mm-hmm. Yeah, his film is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, and we won't watch it right now, but I mean, Marshawn Thornton, the other receiver from Mount Carmel, who doesn't get as much love and attention because of Quentin Burrell, is a player that we'll be talking a lot about as well. He's a good football player, man. So, it's just loads of talent in the area, man. Loads of talent. But looking at his football stats, actually, this is his basketball stats. So he's apparently a basketball player as well. But yeah, this is a team that's got the tools to clean up in Chicago. There's no excuse not to. Now they just got to go get it done. That's going to be the big key. Got to go get it done.
100%. Folks, that's going to do it for part 3 of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. But don't go anywhere. We're getting ready to talk some big picture college football topics, specifically around the playoffs. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in the final part of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're talking about the college football playoffs. This is more of a big picture way to end today's show. And what we're talking about here, obviously, the college football playoff landscape has changed over the last couple of years. Obviously, they made the switch in 2024 to expand to 12 teams. It's been that way the last 2 years. And we've kind of seen some routine teams in the playoffs the last couple of seasons. Ohio State, Georgia, their programs like that are always around the conversation or in contention.
Yep.
But what we wanted to do is talk about what programs from each conference do we think are kind of the next in line to make this playoffs. And that's where we're going to start with this one.
Yep. It's going to be fun, Trev. This is part of the fun of looking around is like, obviously, there's going to be teams that have been in it the last couple of years that are going to be in it again this year. Notre Dame was in it last year, meaning in the conversation. They were in it last year. You have Indiana was in it literally in the last 2 years. Miami was in it the last 2 years. They made it this past year. They were in the conversation the year before. If they would have beat Syracuse or Georgia Tech in November, they're in. Bama's been in the conversation the last 2 years. Made it once, didn't make it another year. Georgia's been in. And then there's the teams that kind of like kicked the door down a little bit in the last 2 years. Tennessee did it 2 years ago. Ole Miss obviously did it this past year. I don't think Ole Miss was in it the year before. Their 3 losses. I mean, they lost to a 4-8 team and 6-6 team. They weren't a real playoff contender in 2024. Only ESPN thought that they were that. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I look at it, Trev, is who are the newcomers to watch this year that could maybe crash the party a little bit. I think there's, there's people that are teams, like you said, that are like, of course, everybody's going to think that, but are there any potential party crashers? And that's what I want to do in this show is what we're going to do is we're going to pick the one team out of each of the Power 4 leagues, talk a little bit G5, and then we'll kind of rank them and then talk about some other potential contenders, just the teams that we have our eye on that could make their first 12-team playoff berth. So, again, this is for the 12-team playoff because there's some teams we're going to talk about that made the 4-team playoff in the pre-expansion era that's a little bit of a different world now, right? So, like when LSU or other teams made it, Michigan made it. This is before the leagues expanded. This is before USC came over into the Big Ten and Oregon came into the Big Ten. And there's a lot of different things that you have to consider. So that's what we're going to do, Trev. And we're just going to go ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC. And Trev and I are going to each give you the teams that we like. And, you guys aren't going to be surprised that a lot of these that we talk about are, I think actually our number one team is the same in 3 of the 4 leagues, correct?
Correct.
And then my number one and the one is your number 2, and I think vice versa. So we're going to have some fun with this, Trev, but let's talk first. Let's talk about the ACC. And so obviously teams that aren't eligible, SMU's not eligible, Clemson's not eligible for this conversation, and SMU's not Miami's not eligible. They've made it. Is there a team, multiple teams in the ACC this year that we think we have our eye on? Okay, can they kick the door down? I mean, Virginia was a win over Duke away from that last year, obviously. And so who's that team this year in the ACC that has the best shot to be sort of the new party crasher for the college football playoffs?
Yeah, I think with this conversation, you have to start with Louisville and the Cardinals. I like what they have. They were able to maintain their running back room. They got Isaac Brown back to withdraw his name from the transfer portal, which I think is huge for them. Again, they are a very reliant team on the transfer portal. That's something that I think has to change under the Jeff Brom regime if they want to be a habitual program that is always mentioned with the college football playoffs. But more so immediately, I think they have some of the tools in place. I like Lincoln Kienholz going to Ohio State. I love that fit so much better with Jeff Brom than what I did with Miller Moss coming over from USC. I think they have the opportunity. Now, obviously, with any of these programs, there's things that they're going to have to work on. With Jeff Brom, I have no issues about what they're going to look like in big games. His issue is the opposite. Can you just not lose that head-scratching game when you go out to Stanford? Can you not lose to a Cal team that's fighting to be 500? Can you not lose at home to like a Pitt team that's 3-9? Like, if you can avoid those losses, I think Louisville puts himself in playoff contention.
Yeah, I mean, Trev, they haven't been that far outside of it the last 2 years. I mean, last year you talk about, even with Miller Moss, even with the issues with Miller Moss, Trev. I mean, they still started the season 7-1 with their only loss being a 3-point loss to Virginia. They beat JMU by 2 touchdowns, a playoff team. Think about it. They beat 2 playoff teams last year. 2 teams that made this year's playoff. They beat Miami on the road, and they beat James Madison by 2 touchdowns. You look at the year before, they played 2 playoff teams a year before, and another team that was not choking at the end of the season away from being in the playoffs in Miami. If Miami doesn't choke down the stretch, Miami's in back-to-back playoffs the last 2 years. They just needed to beat Georgia Tech and Syracuse. They need to beat one of the two to be in the playoff in 2024. And they lost each of those games by a touchdown. And then later in the year, they smacked Clemson. So in the last 2 years, Louisville's beaten 3 playoff teams the last 2 years, and 2 of them were by double digits. So it's there. And then like this year, Trev, they climb all the way up to number 15, and they lose to Cal at home. A week later, they lose at home to Clemson in a game where they missed like 3 kicks. It was like neither one of those teams. I was actually on the road that week. Where was I? Was that the weekend of Pitt? I think it was weekend of Pitt. I think I called you from. I was having dinner at Texas Roadhouse. I just gotten into town. It was a Pitt weekend, and I'm like, dude, I'm sitting there watching it on my iPad in the restaurant, and I'm like, dude, I don't think either team wants to win this flipping football game. Like they're just choking, and it's like stuff. And then they go on the road the next week against SMU and get blasted, finish unranked. And it's got to be frustrating as a Louisville fan because you're like, dude, we can beat good teams. We've beaten 3 playoff teams the last 2 years. You know, like man, we can do this. I mean, they beat Georgia Tech convincingly the year before. Went on the road and smacked a number 11 Clemson who made the playoffs. They have absolutely annihilated Kentucky the last 2 years. Beat them 41-14 the year before. And this year wasn't like 41-0. I'm pulling up the box score. I think it was like 41-0. Yeah, 41-0 over Kentucky. And then also in 2024, they beat Pitt when Pitt was still considered a decent team. Like they destroyed Pitt. So they've had their moments where you're like, dude, that's a playoff caliber team. And then you're like, how do you lose to that team? And they've lost to 3 playoff teams. They've lost to 3 playoff teams the last 2 years. They're 3-3 against teams that make the college football playoffs. And like in either of the 2 years. And those losses were by 7-point loss to Notre Dame, a 7-point loss to SMU, and a 7-point loss to Miami. Like, it's pretty good, Trev. It's pretty good.
Yeah. They didn't have bad. So Louisville was our team in the ACC. Let's switch gears over to the Big 12. And Brian, I don't know how this was for you. For me, this was probably the easiest of the Power 4 conferences to predict the next team that I think is going to make the playoffs. It's BYU. I mean, Kalani Sitake over the last 2 seasons almost has an identical record to what Marcus Freeman has win-loss wise in 24 and 25. And BYU, along with Notre Dame, was another team that I thought should have been in the college football playoff this past season. And so very interested to see what they do this upcoming season, especially with the news of Parker Kingston, or is that his name? Parker Kingston, who's out this upcoming year. But
I would BYU, have they announced that he's definitely out yet? I don't think they have yet, but he will be once the legal proceedings are done. He'll likely be removed from school.
Agreed. Yeah. So that outlook is unfortunate. But with that being said, I do still think BYU is the next team out of the Big 12 to make the dance.
Yeah. I think they definitely have the best chance. Obviously, Texas Tech made it last year. The only team that really could beat them in the Big 12 this last 2 years was really the close loss to Arizona State, which kept them out because BYU's gone into each of the last 2 seasons with a chance to make the college football playoffs, Trev, and they haven't been able to get it done both years. I think they had best or second best odds to get it when November started in 2024, and then obviously got beat by Arizona State late in the year. Also lost to Kansas at home. I mean, they went into the month of November ranked 9th, and they were undefeated. They had beaten a playoff team. They'd beaten SMU on the road. Lost to Kansas by 4, lost to Arizona State by 5 on the road. They win one of those 2 games, they're playing for the Big 12 championship. And so it's like, close this year. They just couldn't beat Texas Tech. I thought that BYU was a team that going into the Big 12 title game had a legitimate complaint to be a playoff team if they could have kept that close. I think getting beat convincingly both times kind of is what knocked them out for me. But if it's a year where it's the 12-team playoff and it's just the 12 best teams, they were one of the 12 best teams. They were just always going to get knocked out by the G5 team. They're the team that should have got knocked out by the G5 team this past season. But like, they're a top 12 team. They were a top 12 team the year before, in my opinion. This is a good football team. Can they kick down that door though and win their league? That's going to be the big key. Having a road game against a team like Notre Dame will help them if they can be competitive in that game, or a home game against a team like Notre Dame. So you look at it this year, Trev, and they get you look at their schedule. They've got non-conference early in the season. They got Utah Tech and Colorado State. Those are two games you got to win. You have a home game against Arizona. You have a home games against Iowa State, home games against Arizona State, home game against Baylor. They play Cincinnati at home, and then their road games are TCU, UCF, Utah, and Kansas. No Texas Tech. So at Utah is going to be tough. At TCU is going to be tough. At Kansas could be sneaky tough. The rest of the good teams they play are at home, including Notre Dame. You've got to be competitive against Notre Dame, and you've got to get to the Big 12 championship game. That's what gives them a chance. Now, if they can upset Notre Dame, again, we don't want that to happen. But if we're looking at it honestly, if they go 11-1 with an upset win over Notre Dame, and then lose the Big 12 title game by a field goal, I think they have a resume that gets them into the playoffs. And I think the gap between them and everybody else in the league as of today is somewhat significant as far as the teams who haven't made it yet. So no Arizona State, no Texas Tech in the conversation that we're having. Those teams have already made it. Because I think those two teams both have a shot to be a playoff teams again this year too. I think Arizona State's going to have a little bit of a bounce back year. I do. I like what they did in the portal. I like what they got coming back. But I think it's BYU is without a doubt that next team. And if Utah hadn't chased Kyle Whittingham out of town, they might be my team this year, Trev. They really might.
Honestly.
Especially as they get BYU at home.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree with that. Let's talk about the Big Ten. And this was the only conference where you and I saw it differently. And
not by much.
No, agreed completely. It was a smaller margin, but for me, I went with USC. I could see them making a push for it because I think that their schedule sets them up into a spot where if they're able to pull off some big wins, I think USC might have an argument to make the playoffs because their schedule this year, and yes, I know we've dogged on them for taking Notre Dame off their schedule, rightfully so, but they have home games against Oregon, Washington, and Ohio State. And they have road games against Penn State, Wisconsin, and Indiana. If they can split those games or go 4-2 and manage to go 4-2 in those games, I think they have a strong case to make the playoffs because for the first time since 2022, USC is going to go undefeated and they're out of conference. That was the last time that they went 3-0 out of conference because Notre Dame has beat the brakes out of them the last three times that they've played them. Final scores aren't as indicative of how dominant those wins were for Notre Dame. Now, if they're able to go undefeated in the regular season because they replaced Notre Dame with San Jose State, and their two other out-of-conference games are against Fresno State and Louisiana, I'm willing to chalk up wins for them for on the road against Rutgers, on the road against UCLA, home against Maryland. If they can handle the travel and the environment well against Penn State, if they're able to get some marquee wins in there, I think they would have a case for it. And they have a little bit more of an infrastructure in place from Michigan. That was kind of the only thing that kind of set it apart for me between that debate between USC and Michigan.
Could you elaborate on what you mean by infrastructure? I'm not just curious.
Yeah, so they have more of an established head coach in terms of their program. I like Kyle Whittingham better as a head coach.
Being there?
Yes.
Meaning like being there? Okay, got it.
Yes, being there, understands the culture of that program. And there's also just no like big controversy that USC is digging themselves out of, opposed to Michigan, where it's not only
their
are you
coach is a pansy.
Yeah. Outside of that, but there's no like legal. Yeah, outside of their coach being Marcus Freeman's son, there's no. Yeah. That's what set it apart for me.
Yeah, it's Marcus Freeman's got 7 kids that we know of right now. Obviously, the 6 that we all talk about, and then Lincoln Riley. So, I don't disagree with anything you said. Nothing you said. The thing for me is I don't think they can do it. That's the thing for me, and that factors into it. And I actually think the path for Michigan, I think Michigan's a better team. I have more faith in Michigan because, number one, I know it's a new coach, but it's a new coach that's proven he can get the most out of his players more often than not. And he's going to have a good roster, pretty good roster. But you just mentioned it. I mean, you got Oregon at home, you've got Washington at home, you've got Ohio State at home. Then you got to play at Penn State, at Wisconsin, at Indiana. And they have not been a team that's done well when they've got to travel all the way out east. You are absolutely correct in that 10-2, if they're not in the Big Ten championship, likely gets them into the playoff. Because here's the way I look at it. If they go 4-2 in the games you mentioned, I believe you said Oregon, Washington, Penn State, Ohio State, Indiana, and what was the other one? Was it Wisconsin?
Wisconsin, yeah.
That's doable. But I also think if they go 5-1 against that schedule and then get upset by like Rutgers or UCLA and they go 10-2, that still, I think, has a great chance to get them in because that means they have a lot of great wins on their resume. So it's kind of like Notre Dame going, 11-1 and losing, having a terrible loss to Northern Illinois, but it ended up probably being better that they lost to Northern Illinois, but still beat Texas A&M on the road, beat USC on the road, beat Louisville on the road, that kind of thing. Same thing here. And that's kind of how it was for Alabama. Alabama benefited from losing to not good teams last year because then they could still say, yeah, but we beat these other good teams, even though they sucked. So it's just, I don't think they're capable of going 4-2 against that schedule. I don't. I don't. I think this is a good football team, but their coaching issues are there. And I look at the other side, Kyle Whittingham, first-year coach, staff has been like completely remade. I only know of like 2 assistant coaches that are stayed, I believe. I think Kerry Coombs and Tony Alford, I think, are the only 2 that I know of that are still there. They went out and got a bunch of new coaches. I mean, I get all that. But when I look at their schedule, Trev, first of all, the first 4 games are at home. Michigan also has a schedule that I think if you go 10-2 against it, you're pretty good. So if you go 10-2 at Michigan this year, that means you have at least 2 wins. You have at least, actually, I'd say 3 wins over a schedule that includes Oklahoma, Iowa, Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State. And I just think they're more likely to win some of those games than USC is. They get Oklahoma at home, they get Iowa at home, they get Penn State at home, and they get Indiana at home. They have to travel to Oregon and to Ohio State, and that's why I don't think they will make the playoff. I think the Big Ten's going to be a 3-team league again, but I just feel like they've got a better chance at holding serve and then at least getting 1 good road win than does USC. Better coach. I think they're going to be tougher. I do like Bryce Underwood. I think he's going to be better this year, but I think Michigan has the best shot by this much. I think you think that USC's by this much, and there are 1 and 2. They're the top 2. I'd love to say Iowa. There's 2 reasons that I can't put Iowa in this conversation, Trev. They're probably 3rd for me, and it's number 1 is I gotta see who their quarterback is, and I gotta see them for the first time ever, like really allow their quarterback to kind of go play ball. And I just don't know that they can get over that 9-3 hump. I just don't know if they have the horses, the athletes on the perimeter. I don't know if they are going to turn it loose enough to do that. And the other thing too is their schedule's not a cakewalk either. They got to play at Michigan, at Washington, at Minnesota, at Illinois. The good news is they do play Ohio State and Michigan, but they don't play Indiana and they don't play Oregon. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But I'd like to say Iowa. But, I mean, goodness, you got to show me that you can get over that 9-3 hump with this group of players. And without them having a question at quarterback, it just makes me – I just can't get them there. But if it's not one of the 2 we talked about, I think Iowa's got the best chance. Washington is one that I considered, but they've got too many issues on defense, and the quarterback situation is a question mark. And I still am not super sold on Judd Fish yet. Just not super sold on him yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Iowa's a team that always should be around the discussion of if they should be in the discussion. That's how I view Iowa. There's two trains of thought. Sometimes it's great when you can look at a program, it's like they are who they are. That's great when you're talking about Ohio State or Texas or Notre Dame or Georgia. When you're Iowa, there has to be some self-reflection if they want to be a playoff caliber team or a playoff team, not playoff level, but a playoff team, in my opinion. I agree with you. Let's talk about the SEC, Brian, because we're back on track to seeing this at the same light. And we're talking about the LSU Tigers. And some of that is just a little bit of process of elimination, because when you talk about some of the top level teams in the SEC, it's like, okay, well, Bama's made it, Texas A&M has made it, Texas has made it, Georgia's made it, Ole Miss has made it,
Tennessee.
Oklahoma's made it. Yep. So
all those teams aren't eligible for this conversation.
Right.
So, like, to Trev's point, like, process of elimination this is new. Just a reminder for people who might join the show. These are teams that have a shot to make their first 12-team playoff berth.
Yep.
So almost half the league is out because they already made it. Maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe Bama should be on this list. And I think Bama should be on this list, but they are not.
No, sir. But in all seriousness, I do think LSU is poised to be in a spot where.
Serious? I was being serious. Bama should be on this list.
No, I agree. They absolutely should be. But the bump of getting Brian Kelly out of town was definitely a huge start, moving it in the right direction. And what has LSU needed really since Jaden Daniels left, their Heisman winner? Needed a better offense. Yes, they needed some improvements on defense, but they were a major letdown the last couple seasons, in my opinion, on offense. They brought in a guy. Now, off the field, a lot of opinions about Lane Kiffin. But on the field and what he's been able to put out there as a product on offense, I like this hire for LSU. I like the talent they have. I think they're kind of the next in line to make the playoffs out of the SEC.
Well, LSU hasn't made the playoffs in the 12-team playoff era, but their head coach has.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he didn't coach in it, but he led the team to the playoffs. He built the team that went 11-1 and won the playoffs. So it's not like he doesn't know how to manipulate the SEC, or, and I don't mean manipulate in a negative way. I just mean like getting through it and being able to do what it takes to win. They've won double-digit games the last 2 years in the SEC. They've had their ups and downs, but he's going to have a very talented roster, and the teams are going to be playing. He knows what all those teams are capable of. And so I think LSU's the best shot. And then and there's a huge gap between LSU and the next teams on this list because, like you said, Trev, Tennessee's not in the conversation, Bama's not in the conversation, A&M's not in the conversation, and Oklahoma's not in the conversation, and Ole Miss isn't in the conversation. So even just this last year took a lot of those teams off. Ole Miss came off this past year, Oklahoma came off, and then Alabama came off. Now, again, I think this list should be longer of teams who haven't made the playoffs, but that's another conversation for days. We've already had those conversations. And I'm out here catching strays in the Crane and Cone show when they were having their Alabama-Georgia debate. I'm on a schedule. I'm out there catching strays. I have to talk to them about that. I feel like LSU has the combination of a proven coach, combination of talent, and a schedule that gets them in. Because when people talk about schedules, far too often the conversation turns to, okay, you have a schedule that's manageable, that is going to allow you to win a bunch of games. And I don't think that's what the conversation should be, especially in the SEC. But even in the Big Ten, part of the reason that Michigan and USC are on our list are because they're teams that can get in at 10-2. And Indiana in 2024 isn't getting in at 10-2. If Michigan would have come back and beat them in that game, because that's the only other competitive game they played in the regular season, they're not in at 10-2. They're not even close to 10-2. They went on the road at 11-1. And same thing this year. If Indiana's 10-2 this year, they're not in the playoffs. If they would have lost to Oregon early in the season and then lost to Penn State, let's say they don't come back against Penn State, they're not in the playoffs. Not with that schedule. Those teams have it. And when I look at LSU, I see a team that can go 10-2 and still get in. Not as likely. I mean, it's not actually like a gauntlet schedule, depending on how good you think some teams are going to be. But I think a lot of people are going to assume the schedule is going to be tough. Clemson, They play at Ole Miss. They get A&M at home. They play at Auburn, at Tennessee, at Arkansas, home against Bama, home against Texas A&M, home against Mississippi State. That's a pretty darn schedule based on what the preseason rankings are going to look like. Even if a couple teams aren't as good as we think they are, I don't think Ole Miss is going to be as good as people think that they are this year. I think Tennessee's going to be better this year. I think Bama's going to be actually better this year than they were last year. Not playoff worthy or not. They weren't worthy last year, but I think they're going to be a better team. I think Auburn's very much improved. Clemson, I think, is going to end up being a good team. If they go 4-2, or let's see, Clemson, at Ole Miss, home against A&M, at Auburn, home against Bama, home against Texas, at Tennessee. If they just beat the teams they're supposed to, and they go 5-2 against that schedule, how do you keep them out of the playoffs? I mean, I know there's a bunch of one-loss teams, and because there's all these imbalanced schedules and all that. But when I look at LSU, I'm like, dude, if they're a 10-2 team, they're in. There's a world in which they're 9-3 and praying for some week 12 or game 12 upsets to maybe jump them into the back of it. Because let's say, Trev, they lose to Clemson in the opener. Let's say they beat Clemson. Let's say they lose at Ole Miss. Let's say they get upset at Auburn and they lose at Tennessee. Let's say they lose those 3 games. They would still have wins over Clemson, Texas A&M, Alabama, and Texas. That's the kind of – it's like Georgia 2 years ago. If everybody's as good as people think they are. Now, this assumes that all the teams we just talked about are as good as people think they are, which I don't know that they will be. But if they are, that's a schedule where 9-3 has them in the conversation as a legitimate 9-3, not like the garbage conversations people were having last year, or Texas, a team that lost to a 4-8 Florida team, should be in. I'm talking about a legitimate 9-3 argument to make, depending on who they lose to. And if you're LSU, you're better off having one of your losses be an upset. Like you get upset at Kentucky or at Auburn. Because if it's an upset, that means you've got some great wins on there. So that's why I think LSU has that chance. I think their schedule is such. And can I say something nuts here, Trev? I'm kind of hoping that they beat Clemson, go 9-3, and make the playoffs. Because I think if they can do that, I think that's, hey, guys, look, played a tough non-conference game, lost 3 conference games, and it's because they beat Clemson out of conference that they're in. That's why you should schedule tough out of conference. That's actually a bit of a dream scenario for me, and I don't have to be upset about it because I'm not rooting for Brian Kelly to do that. I don't care if Lane Kiffin does that. From a big picture college football standpoint, if a team like LSU can have a big non-conference win, lose 3 tough in-conference games, and still get in because Clemson's as good as you and I think they're going to be, they end up being a top 15 team. And you can say, hey, look at that big win over 15th ranked Clemson in the non-conference, no blowout losses, a lot of really good wins in their league. They reward them for playing that tough non-conference game. I would like to see a 3-loss team maybe get in that scenario, assuming they're not like bumping out like a really good 11-1 team just because it's in the SEC. Like, don't bump out 11-1 BYU to make this point, but you see where I'm going. So I think they're the most likely, Trev.
Well, and you're not alone in thinking that either. FanDuel also has LSU as one of the teams, as the highest team in their national championship odds, because they don't have playoff odds released yet. But LSU has the highest odds to win the national championship of any team in college football that has yet to make a 12-team playoff. LSU has currently better odds to win it all than Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma, USC, Michigan, Florida, Penn State, Texas. And then after that, the list gets pretty lengthy of teams that I just don't think have a shot in heck to win it this upcoming season. But you're not alone in that thinking, but I agree with you completely. Let's take the 4 teams that we just talked about that we think have the opportunity to be that next in line in their conference. So for you, we're talking about Louisville, BYU, Michigan, and LSU. And then for me, Louisville, BYU, USC, and LSU. Let's put them in order of teams that we think are most likely in that grouping of those 4. Who are you thinking?
Do you want to go 4-1 or 1-4? How do you want to go?
Let's go 4-1.
Okay. My number 4 is the Big Ten team. And that's just because I think there's a big gap between the top 3 and the next group, and I just think those next level Big Ten teams, Michigan, whether it's USC, Washington, Iowa, somebody in the chat mentioned Illinois, whoever you think that number 4 Big Ten team is, I don't think that a lot of them have the kind of schedules that can get them in at 10-2 or 9-3. Definitely not at 9-3. They got to go 10-2. Michigan has the best option of going 10-2 or 10-2 getting in, because I think they'd have that tough non-conference game. But I just don't have a lot of faith in any of those teams to actually get it done and be 10-2. I mean, I can talk to you about schedules all I want. I think USC has to be an impressive 10-2 to get in, because I think their non-conference could hurt them. Michigan at least has that. If they go 10-2 and lose 2 league games, means they beat Oklahoma, who I think is going to be really good this year.
Yeah.
So I just don't think either one of them have the ability to do that. I don't think they're good enough football teams to do that. There's too many holes, too many flaws, and their schedules are both challenging enough in their conference that I think they're 3+ loss teams. And they don't have an LSU schedule, a Texas 2020 or a Georgia 2024 schedule, where they can lose 3 games and still have 4 big wins on their resume that can, get them into the playoff. I just don't. If they lose 3 games, that means they both have like maybe 1, maybe 2 really big wins.
I'm with you. That Big Ten team is in that number 4 spot for me as well. USC just needs so much for them to happen to make the playoffs. And yes, we could talk about taking Notre Dame off the schedule, and now that's a guaranteed win. I agree. But unfortunately for them, the first year that they take Notre Dame off their schedule is when they actually play a decent in-conference schedule. Decent might even be a little bit too light. It's a difficult in-conference schedule for USC this year. So they're my number 4 team as well. Who's your third team, Brian?
Of those 4, I think BYU is my number 3. I think the loss of Parker Kingston's going to hurt. I think they suffered some other enough personnel losses to where a move like that can hurt them. And then I also think the thing that's going to hurt them is I think they're probably a 10-2 regular season team, which means they'd have to go win their league. I think the Big 12 is going to be a little bit improved this year as a league, Trev. I think there's going to be some teams that are going to bounce back a little bit this year. I think Arizona State bounces back a little bit this year. I think TCU is going to still be good. I think they have to play, at Utah, which is still going to be a very tough game. They barely beat Utah last year at home. I think Kansas is going to be improved this season. I like some of the things they did. You're getting Koldenicky back with Lance Leopold, which I think that as a group duo, they do very well. I just look at their schedule: at TCU, at Utah, at Kansas, home against Arizona State, home against Arizona. BYU's been great the last 2 years, Trev, but they've also kind of had a lot of win by the skin of their teeth wins the last couple of years also. They're not like Texas Tech where they're just smoking people. I mean, they had to hang on to beat Colorado last year. They had to hang on to beat Arizona. Actually, they had to come back to beat Arizona last year, didn't they? Didn't Arizona have a lead and they came back? I think is how that game went, but they had to beat them in overtime. They beat Utah by 3, and just they ended up beating Cincinnati by 12, but like that was a close game for a while. They were down to UCF early. So I just think their margin for error is a little bit smaller, where some of the losing a guy like Parker Kingston doesn't hurt them. I know they did it with the quarterback last year. I never thought he was that good, to be honest with you. I think they had a better quarterback in Bear Bachmeier. So I think BYU would be the one. And the fact that they've got Notre Dame, that's an L in my opinion. And it narrows their margin for getting in. Because remember, 2 years ago, Trev, when they went into November with a shot to get in, a big part of their resume was, hey, we had a really good non-conference win over another playoff contender in SMU. They won't have that this year. They'll have a loss to a playoff team this year.
Yeah, no, I think those are very valid points. My number 3 team is Louisville for a couple of different reasons. One, I just talked about how excited I was about the Lincoln Kindholds pickup with Jeff Brom, but there's a lot of projection there, and a little bit more projection with that than I'm going to need with Bear Bachmeier taking a jump from year 1 as a starter to year 2 as a starter, whereas Lincoln Kindholds is going into year 1 as a starter. I think that's a factor too. Louisville's also an undisciplined football team. And that's one of the reasons why that they're just like, they'll go beat some crazy ranked opponent and then lose the next week to a 3-9 team.
It's maddening.
It's crazy, man. It is, and
I get frustrated by it, and I'm not even a Louisville fan.
That's what I'm saying. I'm a Jeff Brom
Imagine
fan.
what it's like to be a Louisville fan. I am as well. I'm a Jeff Brom fan. Correct.
That's what I'm saying. But the frustrating thing about Jeff Brom-led teams is the next time that he goes through a season and doesn't have that just ridiculously head-scratching loss will be the first time a Jeff Brom team goes through a season without that just dumbfounding head-scratching loss. And they're out of conference this year. If they can pull off wins, is going to be huge because they have Ole Miss out of conference. And then in rivalry week, they also get Kentucky on the road. But I think it's going to be an improved Kentucky team. Now, their in-conference schedule is interesting. They kick it off with SMU at home. They're going to be an improved program. They get NC State on the road. And if there's one thing that we know about a Dave Dorn-led team is they'll be really good at home. Question is, what are they going to be on the road?
Tough to beat.
That's what I'm saying.
They get outside the city limits, they're a lot more beatable.
They are. They are. I mean, they get Florida State at home. Who knows what they're going to be this year? They get Georgia Tech on the road, North Carolina on the road, Pitt on the road. So I think their in-conference schedule sets up relatively favorably, but it's just the thing that I'm going to have to chalk up with Louisville every single year is they're going to drop one of those games that they shouldn't. And that's going to be the frustrating thing. That's what kind of held it back. My 2 and 3 is close.
Louisville's my 2. And a big reason for that is a lot of things that you say. I look at their schedule. There's no Clemson on their schedule this year. They get SMU at home. They get Florida State at home. There's no Virginia on their schedule. There's no Duke on their schedule. You know, you look at some of the other top teams in the ACC.
No Miami.
Wake was a really good team. There's no Miami on the schedule. Wake was on there, who won 9 games last year, but that's at home. If you look at just records from last year, the 2 best teams they play, they get from the ACC, they get at home. And then the next toughest team they play would be Georgia Tech, and they have to go to Georgia Tech. I don't know that Georgia Tech's going to be as good this year. I don't think people realize how important Haynes King was to their ability to win football games. Like, you could argue he was the most valuable player in college football last year. You can at least debate it. You know, and so, you know, Syracuse on the road will be a surprisingly tough game. But, like, that's the kind of game they've got. You get a big win. You go on the road and you beat SMU at home. And you go on the road and beat NC State. You beat Florida State at home. And then you just go to Syracuse and lose to Syracuse. Or then you beat Syracuse on the road and then you come home after a bye week on October 31st and lose to Stanford at home. Here's the thing for me with Louisville. My answer has an asterisk, and my asterisk is talk to me about midnight on September 6th. Because the Louisville game, to me, is the big game for them. Because if they can beat Louisville on a neutral field, then they have Ole Miss on a neutral field, then they have a shot to get in as an at-large. Because if they're 10-2 with 2 SEC wins, and then they go play Miami in the ACC title game, they're 10-3. They have a shot to get in. If they run the table in their league, except for, let's say they lose at NC State, and they win the rest of them, and then they also beat Ole Miss, it doesn't matter what they do in the ACC title game. They're in. And so but if they lose that game, now you have to win the ACC. That's kind of where I'm at. If you lose that game, you have to win the ACC. That's going to be tough because I think Miami is the clear top dog in that league right now. And honestly, it has been the last 2 years. Miami choked away. I mean, they were up like 20-something to nothing against Syracuse 2 years ago and just choked that game away. Like, they've had the best roster in the ACC the last 2 years, and that's not going to change this year. But the other thing about Louisville, who has the second best roster in the ACC? Who would you argue has the second best roster? Not named Louisville. Did you say it's Clemson? It's Clemson or SMU, right? Did you say those are probably the 3 best rosters in the league outside of Louisville? Miami, Clemson, and SMU? No,
yeah.
the top 3. Would you say the top 3 are Miami? Because after Miami, I'd argue it's Clemson and SMU, right? Not counting Louisville because they can't play themselves.
Yeah.
Well, they don't play 2 of those teams, and the one that they do play in that group, they get at home. So, you know, like the opportunity is there for you if you're Louisville. And I just think their schedule sets up better for them than some of the others. Like the other teams we were just talking about, they all play gauntlets in their league. Louisville does not. They don't have to play 2 of the 3 best teams in their league. And then the other team that they do play that's considered one of those teams, they get at home. Well, Florida State's going to have a bounce back year. Maybe. Get them at home. Yeah, you get them at home. So
flip of a coin with them, bro.
But let's say they are. You get them at home.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. And that's what I think Louisville has the best shot. Who's your 2, Trev? Did you already give your 2 yet?
Not yet.
Okay, let's give your 2.
Not yet. My number 2 is BYU. And it's my margin for difference between BYU and Louisville was a couple of different factors. One, I think BYU is just the more disciplined football team. To your point, the winning some games by the skin of your teeth, you don't do that if you're an undisciplined team. Kalani Sitake's 23-4 over the last 2 years. I don't think that that's an accident. His teams are always very well coached. They're very disciplined. And one of the things I like about him is, yes, the loss of Parker Kingston is absolutely huge. I'm not going to try to paint the picture that it's not. But even outside of him, they still returned 6 starters on the offensive side of the ball, including a quarterback and their 1,000-yard running back. And then defensively, they returned 7 starters of what they had last season. So this is a very experienced football team. BYU is always just going to have more of a veteran roster. And they're also not going to have to try to tackle what Louisville's doing right now and getting a bunch of transfer portal players to play together. I think the overall talent ceiling of Louisville's roster is higher than that of what BYU's is. I do. But BYU doesn't have to overcome some of the obstacles for their roster to reach its ceiling like what Louisville's going to have to. So that's what set it apart for me. Again, my answer could change very quickly depending on what Lincoln Kindholz does in his first couple outings with Louisville.
So important to their season, because I think they might have a quarterback. Like Tyler Shuck made such a huge difference for them 2 years ago. Yep. When he has a quarterback that can run that offense, he is that Louisville team can be really good. If they don't, they're number 4 on this list.
100%.
Actually, they're not even number 1 in the ACC anymore. Actually,
yeah, no, 100%.
Who's your number 1, Trev?
LSU is my number 1 team for a lot of the reasons that we just listed off. I think that their path, process of elimination from the SEC. I think it's LSU, and then there's a pretty sizable gap between the next team that could make a push from the Southeastern Conference. But I love what Lane Kiffin brings from an X's and O's standpoint. He has a quarterback in Sam Leavitt where it's kind of one of those things where you have a controversial head coach, controversial quarterback. You kind of pair them together. Maybe you make lemonade. Who knows? It's going to come down to a lot about what their offensive line does. But I think LSU has the next clear shot. And let's be real about something, folks. They play in the SEC. That's going to give them a bump to make the playoffs ahead of a Louisville, ahead of a BYU. We watched BYU get passed up for a 10-2 SEC team that shouldn't have been in this past year. Who says LSU's not that team this year? But I think LSU has the best and most likely path of the 4 teams that we've talked about so far.
I agree, Trev. I think they have the biggest margin for error because their schedule's the toughest. And if we're being honest, even if it's not tougher, it'll be perceived as tougher. But I actually think it is a lot tougher. I mean, I think that schedule is very tough. I don't know if we're having a preseason conversation based on preseason rankings, I think you could argue that LSU has one of the 10 toughest schedules in college football.
Sure.
I mean, you could have 6 or 7 preseason top 25 teams on there, right? Clemson, we'll see. I expect Ole Miss to be ranked in the preseason top 25. I expect A&M to be ranked. I expect Bama to be ranked. I expect Texas to be ranked. I expect Tennessee to be ranked. That's 5 right there. There's a chance Clemson might be ranked. We'll see. There's an outside chance that Auburn could be ranked. I don't know how, but it is an SEC team, so I don't put it past them at all. But you're talking about at least 5 to 6 preseason ranked teams. And then Auburn might become a ranked team by the time they play on October 24th. Auburn has no business being ranked in the preseason, but that doesn't mean that they won't become ranked because we're both very high on Auburn. So you could go 3-3 against that schedule, and you're going to have people advocating that you're going to be in the playoffs. If Louisville's 9-3, they're not even in the top 20. If BYU, Michigan, or USC are 9-3, they're not even in the top 20, maybe in the late teens. If LSU goes 9-3, the combination of it actually being a legitimately good schedule, combined with them being in the SEC, is going to have them in the conversation. So much greater margin for error. If USC loses 3 games, they're done. If Michigan loses 3 games, they're probably done. BYU loses 3 games, they might not be ranked. If LSU loses 3 games and they're competitive games, they're right there on the cusp. They're I hope so-and-so gets upset this weekend in game 12. That's kind of where they're at, in my opinion. And let's be real. If they're 9-3 and they're ranked 11, and the number 2 ACC team is ranked 10, and that team loses their conference championship game like Bama did last year, that team won't get the benefit of the doubt like Bama got. They'll get dropped and LSU jumps in. So, again, it's just a greater margin for error for them, on top of the fact that I think of those 4 teams, have the best roster. And of those 4 teams, they're the only team who has a coach, top of my head, that has actually led his team to a playoff. The only other one that is Lincoln Riley. So, but he's not in my 4. He's in your 4. But I think we view the job he did to get those teams to the playoffs as like, don't F it up. Now that Bob Stoops has built it, don't screw it up, where he's got to build it at USC. So all of those reasons are why LSU is the clear number 1 for me. Let's finish it up with this, Trev. This will be a fun way to end it. Of all the teams we just talked about, we went through that. What about the next level teams? Let's just briefly talk about some teams that we also considered, and then of those teams, who we think would have the best shot. ACC, Virginia Tech is a team that we both looked at. James Franklin being there, really good portal class. Their talent was better than their results last year. Schedule sets up well enough to where they could maybe find their way into the ACC title game like Duke did last year. And this year, if you're 7-5 and get to the ACC title game and win, you're in the playoffs. Because the new MOU that benefits Notre Dame also benefits, that's also part of the new rule system. And I think Virginia Tech could do that, in my opinion, Trev. Big 12, Houston was both of our top team. I think Utah is also in the conversation. K-State is like maybe, but I got to see some stuff from them first. Big 10, it's the other. So for you, it's Michigan. For me, it's USC. Washington, Iowa, Illinois. And then the SEC, this is the one where I'm not sure. We talked about this. I have Auburn and Florida as my 2 next best teams. The same for you. I don't have Missouri in there. Maybe Missouri. I don't know if they have what it takes to get them over the top. But those are my 3, Trev. Anybody else that you would add as teams that you thought about in that conversation before I've asked you my final question?
No, we have the same order in there. Unfortunately, for a program like Missouri is the Iowa of the SEC. They kind of just are who they are. They're going to, within a margin of 8-4 to 9-3. I'm with you. I don't know if they're going to have what it takes to get them over that hump. I agree.
Now, the interesting thing about them is you look at their schedule, and they've had some cakewalk schedules the last couple of years. I don't know that their schedule this year is going to be as conducive to being 10-2. I think it's going to look a lot like they were a couple of years ago. I think this is a 3-4 loss schedule at least. They play at Kansas. Kansas gave them a game last year. They play at Mississippi State. They play at Ole Miss, at Arkansas, at Georgia. That's potentially 2 losses right there. Then at home, they have to play Florida, Texas A&M, Texas, and Oklahoma. Like, I don't see them being 10-2 against that schedule. Now, with that schedule, if they're 10-2, they're in.
Yep.
But I don't think they're going to be 10-2 against that schedule. Because if you lose to Texas and Georgia, that means you beat Florida, beat A&M, beat Ole Miss on the road, and beat Oklahoma. And then any combination of 3-2 against those 5, you're probably in. I just don't think they have a snowball's chance of heck of going 10-2 against that schedule.
Agreed.
That's my. So I don't have them on there. Of all those teams, Trevor, who are the 1 or 2 teams that you think have the best shot of actually being that team that gets to the playoff?
The number one for me of those teams is probably Michigan. because I took the inverse of, what we talked about with the Big Ten. But that first team for me would probably be Michigan for a lot of the reasons that you listed off. And then outside of those other teams, it's been a quiet job by him, but I'm not going to discredit Houston. Two reasons. One, I think the Big 12 is, like we talked about last year, it's a very wide open conference. I mean, I was adamant that the Big 12 championship game last year was going to be Arizona State versus Kansas State. Kansas State played themselves out of that conversation before September was even over. And Arizona State was what they were last year. I didn't see it being Texas Tech and BYU. I wasn't ready to buy into the hype of Texas Tech. This year, it could be very much of the same. I'm sure the runaway favorites to be in the Big 12 championship game this year is BYU and Texas Tech. Would it surprise you if it was Houston and Houston and Arizona State? Houston and Kansas? Houston and Arizona? No. So I would probably say out of those groupings, Houston would be my second. But I'm telling you, man, I'm really keeping my eye on Auburn. I really am. They're my dark horse team this year.
I actually, looking at mine, Houston and Auburn are mine. And what Houston has is they have a great coach. Willie Fritz is a heck of a football coach. They have a lot coming back from the last year's team, including a veteran quarterback. That's very key for me. And, again, their schedule won't be easy, but it's manageable for them to get. Because here's the thing, Trev, for a team like Houston, it's manageable to get into the Big 12 title game. And all they got to do is win the Big 12 and they're in. It doesn't matter where they're ranked. They just got to win the Big 12. Their non-conference is Oregon State, Southern, and Georgia Southern. They have Texas Tech on the road. They play Kansas State on the road, Utah on the road, which is not going to be easy, at Colorado, at West Virginia. Their home games are UCF, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, Baylor. I could see them being 10-2 against that schedule and making it to the Big 12 title game. They're kind of my number two. But my number one is actually Auburn. Auburn's a very intriguing team to me. I like the job Alex Golesh has done. It was on a much smaller scale, not nearly as much pressure, but I mean, the guy coached in November last year with a chance to make it to the college football playoffs. Now, they didn't get it done, but he kind of went through that. I look at their schedule. They get, Baylor on a neutral field. They have road games at Tennessee, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State, at Alabama, home game against Florida, Vanderbilt, LSU, Arkansas. This is another team that has a 9-3 schedule argument to be a playoff team at 9-3. Let's say they lose at Bama in a close game, at Ole Miss in a close game, and at Georgia in a close game. They would have wins over Baylor, Florida, Vanderbilt, at Tennessee, home against LSU, at Mississippi State. That's a heck of a resume, Trev. Heck of a resume. So I just think they have the biggest margin for error. 9-3 Houston has zero shot of getting to the playoffs because they won't be eligible for the Big 12 title game, in my opinion. They could. But let's say that they lose to Tennessee, Georgia, and then Ole Miss. And their last game of the year, 8-3, they go out on the road and beat Bama, knock Bama out. You don't think there's an argument that some people will be making that they should be in at 12, with 12 teams? It'll be there. The argument could be there. And it's not one that I reject. I have never said a 3-loss team shouldn't make the playoffs. I've said a 3-loss team that either A, gets blown out, or B, gets beat by somebody that sucks shouldn't be in. And Texas had both of those last year. They got blown out by Georgia, and they lost to a 4-8 Florida team. Got dominated, never led for a second of that game. The only time it was tied was nothing. That team shouldn't be in. Bama 2024 had no business being in at 9-3. You and I said before that season, Georgia would if they went 9-3. And that's why I like them. Florida, to me, could potentially be, but the difference between Florida and Auburn is this: quarterback. Byron Brown versus Aaron Philo. It's a big difference for me. I think Byron Brown goes into the SEC and right away is one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion.
Byron Brown's my dark horse to win the Heisman. That guy is just a dynamic playmaker, and he didn't get a whole lot of respect last year because he was with USF and it's the G5. I think he's going to put some people on notice this year because I talk a lot about the transition of quarterbacks going from G5 to P4, but the one caveat of that are players who are dual threat guys. And Byron Brown is built like an absolute brick, you know what? And I think that he's going to turn some heads this year. He's my dark horse to win the Heisman. Yeah. I think he's going to do some things at Auburn. And historically, Auburn's been the best when they've had that kind of quarterback. Nick Marshall, Cam Newton. Now, I'm not saying Byron Brown's going to be the next Cam Newton, but play style wise, very interested to see what he's going to do. That's for sure.
Agree. And then Florida also, to me, has a little bit tougher road. They have to play at Auburn, at Missouri, at Texas, at Florida State, Georgia on a neutral field. And it's going to be in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium this year. Also have Ole Miss at home. Also have South Carolina at home. Also have Oklahoma at home. That's a far tougher schedule. Yeah. It's a 9-3 schedule that could get them in at 9-3. I just don't think they have a snowball's chance of heck of getting in at 9-3. If John Summerall leads his team to go 8-4 against that schedule with a brand new roster, he should be in the conversation for SEC Coach of the Year. I'm not saying he's going to win it, but he should be in the conversation. I just think that Auburn underachieved way more than Florida underachieved, in my opinion. And they've got a lot coming back, and they brought in a lot of really good football players. And like I said, the quarterback situation is different. So that's why they're my sleeper team. So that'll do her. It's a great conversation, Trev. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was. Folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast. But you still want some more IB content here in about 55 minutes. The guys are going live on IB Nation Sports Beat. They're talking about some of Brian Kelly's comments that he made in a recent interview. They're also talking about the Lady Irish women's basketball team and then the World Baseball Classic. So you're not going to want to miss tonight's episode. Brian and I are going to be back tomorrow for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. So make sure you come correct with all your questions, comments. Looking forward to another episode of the Friday free-for-all mailbag. On your way out of here today, please be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.